And welcome, everybody. This is another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and joining me today is all the way up from that country up north is my good friend Pongo. Pongo, how are you doing today?
Doing all right. It's been a day.
It has certainly been a day, but we've got another one of the awesome Sculpty boys in with us today. Another friend here from the States. You guys know him as the madman himself, Cobblepott. Cobble, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm here at least. It's been a day, indeed.
It's certainly, sometimes just being here is the most you can do depending on how things go.
Getting here is half the battle.
Exactly. But joining us today, too, we have a special guest, as you probably saw in the thumbnail of the video, is somebody we just did some gameplay with. There's somebody that we've been watching their channel for a while. We enjoy their content. Pretty all right human being, too, from what I can tell. So give it up for Dylan from Play to Win. Dylan, how's it going?
It's going all right. I'm hanging in there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for doing the gameplay with us. It's honestly a pleasure to get to collaborate and do content with you. So truly honored to get to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So we invited you on because we wanted to do kind of this year in review. What were the best of 2020? And we figured that Dylan would have some opinions, so we thought we'd have him on. And last time when we did our tier list, it was me, Pongo, Phoenix, and Ryan. This time for our best of, it's going to be me, Pongo, and this time we got Cobblepott on and Dylan. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through, we've got some different categories that we're going to be discussing today. Going to go through our best favorite cards in each color, which one was the best one in each one, best multicolor card, different, card types, and then we'll talk about the most improved decks, best commander, and we'll give you some predictions about the coming, or well, I guess it's not coming anymore. We're in 2021, which is wild. But we will give you some predictions for what this year will bring to us. So starting off for us today is we're going to give you the best of the white card. Which white card was the best of 2020? And so starting off, we've got Pongo with his pick for the best of 2020.
All right. Well, let me preface this by saying that I added a specific challenge for myself here, which was to not nominate the same card more than once. And we had discussed this previously, and we had agreed that, okay, we should be fine with nominating the same card for more than one category, but I sort of took it upon myself to try to avoid doing that, just, so that theoretically we would have a few more cards to discuss. So, for the sake of content. So with that caveat out of the way, and with a second caveat, this first card that I'm going to discuss is not necessarily the card that I think is the most powerful white card that was printed this year. In fact, I think we're probably going to talk about that in just a moment, but I do think it is certainly the second most powerful white card printed this year, and it has a special significance for me. So the card in question is Archon of Emeria. And so why did I nominate this card? Well, the reason is because when this card was spoiled, that was kind of like the genesis of King K rule, sort of the King Kenrith rule of law, combos with rule of law, and like possibility storm / knowledge pool lock type deck that Cobblepott also has his version of as well. But basically, for me, the thing that inspired me to build my version of that deck was seeing Archon of Emeria, seeing this incredibly powerful rule of law effect, and saying, oh, it's a good time to build with rule of laws again. That was like such a big aspect of 2020. Something like this huge shift in the meta that happened, and, that left a lot of space for people to start trying to think, okay, well, how can I attack this new metagame? And I think Archon of Emeria in many ways is sort of poster child for that. It's kind of emblematic of that shift, and then potentially of what type of cards have gained stock in 2020.
Right, absolutely. It's one of those cards that certainly opens up some of your options, specifically around, I think that second half of it kind of gets overlooked a lot. Your opponent's, non-basic lands come into play tapped, and that's just a very good asymmetrical piece. But Cobblepott,
especially against fetch lands.
Oh my goodness, for sure. They feel awful. But Cobblepott, so you picked a different white card as your best of 2020. What was the card that you picked and why?
The one that I chose was Drannith Magistrate, and I think that people kind of presume that as kind of the easy choice, just because of the very, very significant impact that it has almost really at any table. Your Archon of Emeria is an excellent card because it is going to disrupt kind of all of the best strategies that we currently have right now. Ad nauseum is just not going to be able to play through it. Underworld Breach is not going to be able to play through it. You can't really resolve a Thassa's Oracle plus Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact through it. So it's just really, really well positioned. But that's kind of where its usefulness ends. It's excellent against kind of those main boogeymen of the format, but then kind of doesn't do a whole lot against kind of the rest of the format. Whereas I think Drannith Magistrate is universally powerful on the one hand because it is asymmetric, and it impacts those decks. So a lot of times you're going to see Ad Naus be coupled with Underworld Breach strategies or a Yogg-Will strategy. After you've cast a whole bunch of spells, then you're going to recast a whole bunch of stuff that's out of your graveyard. Drannith Magistrate just makes those a non-starter, and also either for strategies that are dependent on having their commanders in play, or strategies that are just using their commanders as additional advantage for longer games. So your Thrasios decks or your Tymna decks, your Crown decks, not being able to get those onto the battlefield to play the type of game that you want to play, just really gives a whole lot of advantage to whoever it is that's got Drannith Magistrate on the battlefield. So it's a phenomenal card.
I think the asymmetrical aspect of it is what makes it so much more universally applicable. You can kind of jam it at zero opportunity cost, really, or very low opportunity cost into just about any white deck, where you can't do the same for Archon of Emeria because the strategies you outlined that it affects don't really want to be playing it because it impacts them too much.
Right. So you can play. Drannith Magistrate doesn't hold you up from playing any strategy you want. Whereas Archon of Emeria, because of the fact that it's symmetric, it imposes its rule on you as well. So only a very small subset of strategies can profitably play an Archon, whereas anybody who wants to can, if you're in white, you probably should have a Drannith Magistrate in your list.
Right. Dylan, what was your selection for best white card of 2020?
Yeah, I don't know how to follow up all of that, but I had two, really. I had an honorable mention and one, so I'll just go with my main one because I wasn't sure what everyone else would decide, but Drannith Magistrate was my number one pick for white card. The main reason for me, obviously, you guys said it all perfectly, but the main one for me that pushes it over the edge is really just the fact that it's 2 mana rather than 3. It being 2 mana means that Mox Diamond and Chrome Mox and Lotus Petal with a land can all let you cast Drannith Magistrate on turn 1, which, wow, is that super backbreaking. And although you can Mana Crypt out an early Archon of Emeria, it's a little bit more difficult because those Moxes that just net you 1 mana don't help you do that on turn 1, and turn 1 is such a crucial turn in cEDH. So, yeah, I think Drannith Magistrate is the most powerful one. Also, like Hobble said, you can just put it in any deck, and I would not bat an eye, but some decks I would definitely bat an eye if Archon of Emeria was in.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. I also picked Drannith Magistrate. My reasoning, obviously what you guys all say is true and right and all that, but the correct reason is because it made Lavinia much better. That is the correct reason. It is the best white card of 2020. And I know that kind of sounds ham-fisted, but like Drannith Magistrate, and I do mean that like jokingly and not jokingly at the same time, because I've kind of said this all year, is 2020 was this big like shot in the arm for the Omen Pool list, where we just got a bunch of new toys. I mean, we're going to get into some of the new stuff, but we got Force of Negation, we got Hull Breacher, we got Archon of Emeria, Drannith Magistrate, we got, what was the other? Skyclave Apparition, which is one of my honorable mentions. I mean, we just got so many new tools in blue-white, specifically for Omen Pool, that I just felt like Drannith Magistrate made that deck so much better. And as
for what
somebody
it's worth,
who's been...
both Drannith Magistrate and Archon of Emeria both effectively have the same combo when you're playing either Knowledge Pool or Possibility Storm or those types of things.
Correct.
So
and that's part of what it is it just lets you layer, kind of lets you slot out. Like before, we used to be playing like a Teferi Time Raveler, which is kind of risky to run at a 4-person pod because it makes you be the one to answer all the issues. So Drannith just really did a lot of great work for the deck this year. And so what all you guys said was correct and true and all that. But the real reason, my reason, is because it made my favorite deck much better.
Well, you do have a good point. And I think one thing that we all kind of said, but I think is extra important, is that Drannith Magistrate is also kind of like a win con, like with Possibility Storm. Right. If you can force that hard lock and you have like a Bruce Tarl or some way to, show combat damage, that's effectively a win if you can lock your opponents out from casting any spells. So Drannith Magistrate being like such a powerful stacks piece early on, and then also being kind of like a part of your win con, so good.
One of the things that I don't think enough people think about with Drannith Magistrate that I think is really good, and I not to go too deep into this, but as so I've done a lot of work with Omen Pool, that deck, and I think a lot of people know about the Knowledge Pool side of that lock, but I think the Omen Machine lock with Drannith Magistrate is considerably better, and the reason why,
asymmetry
in certain, the asymmetry also, but you're not letting your opponents draw any cards, and they're not going to be able... It skirts around the Abrupticate issue that the Knowledge Pool lock with, like, Lavinia has, and it kind of does that anyway on its own with Knowledge Pool. But with Omen Machine, you're now playing against your opponent's hand when you drop the Omen Machine, and you get to top deck everything great, and they aren't. And so you're just... And the deck has all sorts of bombs, right? So it's just one of those things where you are getting way more advantage off of an Omen Machine with Drannith Magistrate. And I think it just made that card so much better, where before... it was fine, but it was not very good. And now I think that it's certainly on equal footing in that deck with Knowledge Pool. But you guys didn't come here to sit and listen to me shill that deck. I do that enough on Twitter as it stands. But up next, we have our picks for the best blue card of 2020. And starting us off is Cobblepott. So Cobble, what was your pick for best blue card, of 2020?
I think it goes without question that Thassa's Oracle has to be the pick here. It is what I would consider probably being the best win con that we've ever had. And that's, when I say best win con, I'm not comparing it to Flash, because Flash was an enabler for a win con, because you still had to put together a win after executing Flash.
Go back and look at our first video where we talked about that.
So, but the fact that you can have a Thassa's Oracle come into play and create a trigger, and the trigger is the only thing that you need to respond to, as opposed to needing to keep the Thassa's Oracle on the battlefield the way that you would have to with the Laboratory Maniac or Lab Jace. That creates a surface area of interaction that is much smaller and thus much more likely to win. Because in the case where you're trying to do the old school consult with, for instance, the original Labman, not only could somebody counter your consultation, if somebody had an abrupt decay, they could respond and kill your Labman and disrupt you. In this particular case, the only way to disrupt the combo is by countering either the Oracle or the Consultation, or through a stifle effect, which no one plays. So the likelihood of pulling off a win with an Oracle is an order of magnitude higher. So it's just that much better of a combo. And also this goes without saying that you don't need to have a draw effect in as well. So you can, with the Labman, you put a Labman onto the battlefield, you do the consult. That doesn't win you the game. You still have to draw a card because that's the text of that particular card. In this case, you don't need to have that third card in hand. So instead of having 3 effects to piece together, you only have 2 effects to piece together, which also is going to make your win attempts much more consistent and much more concise, because you only need to actually string 2 things together rather than 3. And if that was different, I don't think that we would have the entire metagame as it is right now warped around Thassa's Oracle. If your deck has blue and black, you run Oracle Consult, period. Just because there's not really a defensible position to do otherwise.
Right, for sure. I think that is the hottest take of the year for sure. Cobblepott is such an out of left field take. Oh my gosh. Dylan, do you think you can bring us back down to reality? I mean, what's your pick for? I'm joking, obviously. What's your pick for best blue card of the year?
I agree. Thassa's Oracle is, in my mind, without a doubt, the best blue card of the year. It's the most efficient win con that I think I've ever seen, that I think most Magic players have ever seen. I think all your points were fantastic. I do have 1 or 2 honorable mentions. And I'm going to bring up one as Fierce Guardianship, though. I think Fierce Guardianship has done so much, along with a couple other free interaction that I'm sure we may talk about. But Fierce Guardianship, just acting as another kind of force of will, has made... it has added, as well as many other things, to ad nauseum decks being able to kind of like confidently protect their stuff. Like lately, I've been playing the Crom ad nauseum stuff and being able to confidently hold up like more than one force effects, like a Force of Will and a Fierce Guardianship, means that when you go all in on your Rain of Filth to sacrifice your lands, it is a little bit easier to get out of that. It makes it feel a little bit more like Legacy, because you got like a grip full of Force of Wills rather than just one Force of Will in your whole deck. So I'm going to give Fierce Guardianship my honorable mention there. I think it's done a lot to push commanders in a certain cool way. But Thassa's Oracle is without a doubt the strongest blue card, probably card of the year.
Right.
Absolutely.
And for the Fierce Guardianship, you really can't diminish how strong it is to be able to cast the spell without having card disadvantage, because I mean, everybody's been in that position where they've had a Force of Will or a the other force, and
Force of Negation.
Force of Negation, and not had an extra blue card to pitch to it. Or, your blue card that you had in hand to pitch to it is a Thassa's Oracle or something, and, it just feels terrible. So not taking on that card disadvantage is just, it's a completely different game. And it's
absolutely, yeah, it's
such a good
It's
feeling.
a free counterspell that rewards you for doing what you want to do, which is cast your commander, rather than Force of Will, which is a complete negative on all aspects, because it's 5 mana for your ad nauseums and you have to lose a card. Yeah, I completely agree.
And that's another reason why Drannith Magistrate is so much better, because it keeps people off of their deflecting swats and their Fierce Guardianships.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I was thinking about this in the car today, because I don't even remember what spurred this on, but I was thinking about how wild it is that, like, how expensive 5 mana counter target spell, even without the exile a card from your hand thing is, right? Like, that's just like so much mana, like, just to counter a spell. I like genuinely was like, why is it 5 mana? Like,
I think that's the point. It's awful if you don't exile a card.
Right.
It's awful when you do exile a card. But
It's awful no matter what, but you always
it.
have to do it.
Yeah. That's the legacy player in me speaking, where in a lot of situations you end up just cutting your Force of Wills from your deck post game 1, because that card is just not that good. It's just kind of necessary in the format.
God, we're gonna get so many comments where it's like, Force of Will's not good. That's I just I
it's
can
good.
see it
It's
now.
just it always feels bad. That's all. It always feels
Yeah.
bad, but it's good.
Yeah. Pongo. Cobble's given his. Dylan's given his. What is your pick for best blue card of 2020?
So I'm going to break with the group once again, possibly not for the last time tonight. And I think in saying that, I think a lot of people are probably not going to be surprised to hear that Thassa's Oracle is probably coming up later. But my top blue card of 2020 is going to have to be Hull Breacher. So
What?
if I was nominating
sucks.
if I was nominating a card more than once, probably I would be nominating Thassa's Oracle here as well. But given that I'm trying to avoid that for this video, the reason why I'm nominating Hull Breacher is just because of how much of an upgrade it is over Notion Thief. Notion Thief was already an extremely powerful card. Like a lot of people were jamming Notion Thieves kind of even in places where they might not even necessarily be playing like wheel effects, so you were just playing it kind of as a hate bear. And while that is like not really like the best thing to be doing, you kind of want to be comboing it. It's still so powerful to be hating on people's draw effects in a format like cEDH that people were doing it and having some degree of success doing it. But Hull Breacher, by comparison, as a 3 mana card and only requiring blue instead of blue and black, is just crazy. That being 1 mana less enables so many powerful things. You can just neoform your Thrasios into a Hull Breacher and then cast a wheel effect, and you kind of just win right then and there. You generate a ton of mana if you manage to wheel plus play Hull Breacher, such that, whatever you wheel into is probably, after emptying everyone else's hands, you're probably going to be able to cast everything you draw into and just kind of keep spinning your wheels from there. It importantly increases the density of like really powerful wheel payoffs that you can play. And I think this is probably the most important thing, which is, in the past, you might have been playing things like Narset, and you might have been playing things like Smothering Tithe, just so you have enough things to kind of like weaponize your wheels with. But Hull Breacher just outclasses all of those to such an extent that it's like, I don't even know if I really need to be playing Smothering Tithe anymore. I certainly don't want to be playing Alms Collector anymore, I think, in like just about any deck. So I think that this is a card that people are kind of waking up to. We knew it was strong from the start, but when we saw kind of like the mini cycle of 3 mana flash creatures coming out of Commander Legends, that is to say Hull Breacher and Opposition Agent, I think everyone was focused on on the latter rather than the former. So people were super excited about Opposition Agent, and people were kind of like, Hull Breacher is going to be strong. People are obviously going to play it because it's clearly good, but we're like freaking out about how much of an impact Opposition Agent's going to have, such that Hull Breacher kind of like slid under the radar. And now that people actually have had a chance to test out the cards, people are like, man, Breacher is like way better than Agent. And It's not 100% clear that that's true. That's certainly a take, but it certainly seems to be a take that is growing in popularity.
Right, I'm with you on that one for sure.
Me too. Breacher's better.
Yeah. I don't know that I think that's a super hot take. I think I think and we're gonna get into this here in a moment.
In a minute, yeah.
Yeah, but Hull Breacher certainly, I mean, okay, I said I wasn't gonna talk about Lavinia anymore, but I'm gonna talk about Lavinia again.
How many minutes are we in?
So, but I mean, like, this was the first time for Lavinia that we really got like a thief effect for real, right? And so that was like a really cool thing for us. We saw that spoiled, and Phoenix and I were immediately just like, so that's immediately going in the list, right? Like, like that's absolutely going in the deck. So I certainly agree that I think it's better than Opposition Agent. My pick for best blue card of 2020 was not Hull Breacher. However, my pick for best blue card was Thassa's Oracle as well. I really can't disagree. I mean, the card got another card banned, guys. Right? Like it. There is certainly an argument to be had.
cEDH card.
Correct. There is certainly well, I mean, if I want to even stray outside of Commander for a moment, I mean, look at Pioneer. Got cards banned in Pioneer. And, you know, we're obviously talking about cEDH here, but it's an incredibly strong card. It brought back an entire archetype in Modern. Ad Nauseam was practically dead in Modern, and Thassa's Oracle got printed, and now all of a sudden it's like top 5 decks in the format right now.
Yeah.
Aren't people playing Leveler and Modern or Legacy all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Like if you can get people to play Leveler in competitive Magic, then there's something broken going on.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the point, right? Is it's so hard for me to look at Thassa's Oracle on any level and not go, this is just the best blue card of this year. It's just such a good, it outclasses, I feel like, so many other win cons to such a large extent. But going back to something we were just talking about, we were talking about Opposition Agent, and we're gonna take a look here at the best black card of 2020. So Dylan, Cobble's got to share, Pongo's gotten to share. Excuse me. What is your pick for best black card of 2020?
I think my pick for best black card of 2020 is Peer into the Abyss. I think Peer into the Abyss has been another one of the pieces that has allowed the Turbo Ad Nauseam decks to rise in so much popularity, because you have another Ad Nauseam, and the fact that you can still cast this when you're at 2 life and draw half your deck and lose half your life and go to 1 is, I think, my favorite part about this deck. Like, if your Ad Nauseam doesn't work, but you have a whole lot of mana and you can cast a Peer, you can still do that. You can fire off again and keep going. And I've done that before, and that has felt fantastic. So, also the art. I know this is cEDH we're talking about, but the art is just super sick and bizarre and crazy, and they're peeling out of each other's heads. It's incredible. Super sick. But yeah, Peer into the Abyss, I think, is just the my favorite black card of the year by far.
Absolutely. Pongo, what is your pick for best black card of 2020?
So Peer was certainly a consideration, but I kind of wanted to save it perhaps for one of the more high-profile categories. So given that, and given that I'm not nominating a card for 2 categories, or multiple categories, I should say, my pick for the best black card of 2020 was Opposition Agent. So Opposition Agent, we discussed this already a little bit, but I think really it shouldn't need much introduction at this point. Everyone absolutely freaked out when that card was spoiled, and we all knew immediately how powerful it was. And it certainly lives up to its power level, when everything is kind of going right. Just being a kind of strictly better Aven Mind Sensor, it lives up to its power level. And Aven Mind Sensor is a pretty good card. So when you shift that into a better color and make it better, it is probably going to be an obscenely good card. So I don't know. I don't know that I have much else to add on the subject of Opposition Agent. Very, very clearly an incredibly strong card. But, perhaps I guess the one thing I could say about it is that it does kind of suffer for not being an incredibly proactive play all the time. Some amount of the time you kind of just want to play it out to be mana efficient, and you're not necessarily catching somebody's tutor when you're doing that. But if the alternative is not spending your mana for the turn, then you're kind of losing out anyway. So you just kind of play it out as a stranglehold. And it turns out that that's the play pattern often enough that Opposition Agent is perhaps not as powerful as we thought it was going to be when we first saw it. But the blowout potential of this card is unreal, and sometimes it will just win the game. So, let's not like poo-poo the card too much.
Absolutely. Cobblepott, what is your pick for best black card?
I also chose Peer into the Abyss. And, Opposition Agent notwithstanding, it is a great card, but I don't think it's a universally great card. I feel like Opposition Agent is really only going to be good if you want to be playing reactive, and I've actually found myself removing it from my very proactive decks, and not so much the case with Peer into the Abyss.
I've been thinking about doing that, so that makes me feel good that you are doing that, because I've been considering cutting it from ad nauseum decks, and I feel like I'm crazy because everyone says it's the best card in the world. But okay, that's kind of verifying.
Right, I'm with you on that. I feel like I want to be playing Hull Breacher, and if I have a choice between Hull Breacher and an Opposition Agent in a proactive Nas list, I always am choosing Hull Breacher, and I'm almost never choosing the Opposition Agent. So that's why it went. So, but getting back to Peer into the Abyss. I mean, just like Dylan said, it's a Nas that, once you get it to resolve, it's way better than Nas, because you're always, if it resolves and somebody doesn't snipe it with a deflecting swat or something like that, you're drawing 40 cards, and you can never die to it, and that's really the redeeming thing that it's not contextual with your life total the way that ad nauseum is. So if people can play against the conventional wisdom, playing against an ad nauseum deck is attack the person, whittle their life down, and then bring down the value that they're going to get out of their ad nause. Well, that doesn't actually change the value that you get out of your Peer into the Abyss. So in a lot of cases, that Peer into the Abyss is going to be insulated from whatever your life total actually is, and it's going to have a consistent, very, very high value. So whereas your ad nauseum is going to have kind of like this floor and this ceiling that have a high amount of variance depending on what's happening in the game, the Peer into the Abyss is almost always the ceiling case, and it's always a great card to resolve. And for that reason, I think that it's absolutely the best black card of the year.
But my best blue card counters your best black card.
Fuck you.
In Cobble, you've been on Peer into the Abyss for
kind of since as soon as it was printed. Yes, I'm kind of one to embrace stuff that people kind of look at, side-eyed sometimes, but I wasn't the only person that thought it was good kind of from the beginning, and I think that it's gotten enough playtime and enough traction that everyone's kind of, I think that the agreement is more or less universal, spleen face notwithstanding, that I think earned its reputation as being a premier black card advantage spell.
Absolutely. I picked Opposition Agent, and my thought process for that was really came down to the fact for me that because I was kind of deciding between Peer into the Abyss and Opposition Agent, and what it came down for me was Opposition Agent has changed people's play patterns. I see people fetch early a lot more and fire off tutors early a lot more now than I did before its printing. I used to see people sit on their vamps, sit on these things, and they still do to some extent, but people are a lot more cautious because they don't want to get blown out. And that to me is just such a huge thing for it, because the only other card that I can think of on this list that has changed the play patterns that we're going to talk about, well, maybe there's only two really, but the one that I really think about is Thassa's Oracle. And obviously it's not as powerful as Thassa's Oracle, right? But you're respecting mana in a way a lot different than you did a few months ago. We respect that open 3 black mana or 3, gold mana, however you can make it happen. We respect that a lot more than we weren't as worried about it with Haven Mind Sensor, right? Like nobody was fetching weird and at weird spots like we before with Aven Mind Sensor. Like if somebody Aven Mind Censored, you're like, oh shoot, well maybe it's in my top 4, and that was about it. If somebody hits you
with the white mana and then the mana crypt on the stack, I was cracking my fetches every time.
Fair. But I mean, I think overall, Pongo notwithstanding, I don't feel like people played around Aven Mind Sensor to the degree that they play around Opposition Agent. And that's why I put it as best black card of 2020, because it really forced people to change the way that they played in a way that other cards this year very few cards this year have made people do, which is incredible because this year had so many good cards. Moving on to...
Well, the last thing I would want to say about Opposition Agent is it kind of has a lot of hidden power, right? So you don't necessarily always recognize when you're playing it just how impactful it is, because you don't see those like 2 or 3 tutors that are rotting away in your opponent's hand. And I think that can actually give people the impression that it's not as powerful as it actually is, because having been on the sort of receiving end of an Opposition Agent, I have like multiple games now in memory where I can just confidently say like, oh man, that Opposition Agent absolutely destroyed me, even if it didn't necessarily get any value off of my tutors. Whereas Hull Breacher, I think it's kind of much more of a known quantity. Like even if you don't necessarily get somebody's draw off of it, if you combo that with a wheel, you feel pretty good about it and you feel like, okay, I've done something. And that sort of does play into like this dissociation between like proactive and reactive uses of the card. But I think that a lot of the time you are just winning games with Opposition Agent because your opponents no longer have options.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's effectually blanking a whole lot of those cards, and just the fact that you're unaware of it doesn't mean that it's not. Right. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not doing that work.
Absolutely. Well, moving on to the color that probably had the biggest glow up of the year is red. Red certainly had what many would consider a very, very good year. Red went from being fine and okay to arguably one of the best colors in the format now. So Pongo, when we're talking about what the best card for red is this year, well, this past year now, what is your pick for best red card of 2020?
I think I'm going to surprise a lot of people here, yet again, perhaps. So my nomination for best red card of the year is, drumroll please, so it's Jeska's Will. And so I know this is going to be surprising to a lot of people because of, again, how many powerful red cards we've gotten this year. The reason why I'm nominating it is largely off the back of some memories of just playing that card and just absolutely having insane results playing it. Yes, my turn 1 win, but also, like various other contexts where I played with the card and I've just seen it do absolutely nutty things. And, you can certainly say that for a lot of these other cards on the list, and you can absolutely say that for the card that I think most of you are going to nominate. But, again, I'm restricting myself a little bit here. So the best red card that you guys name will most likely make it onto my list elsewhere. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough. Cobblepott, what was your best red card of 2020?
Right. I think I'm going to fulfill Pongo's wish here, and I'm going to say Underworld Breach. And I'm sure that's no surprise to really anybody. Underworld Breach is, just another one of those cards that has, come onto the scene this year and has immediately kind of formed its own shell around it. It's become an archetype. It's been kind of effectively solved as far as this is the way that you do Underworld Breach, and you see it used in basically all of the strongest, or at least the fastest decks that you see in the metagame currently. And when it first came out, a couple of us were saying, whoa, this is better than Yogg's Will, and people kind of responded saying, Yogg's Will is one of the strongest cards that's ever been printed in Magic. And it was like,
well, guess what? They just made it better.
Guess what? This is better than that. And I think that it has lived up to the hype. People, kind of quickly embraced it and realized, whoa, this is really, really good. And I don't think that any opinions have changed as it's kind of gathered, the embrace of the community. Everybody who is running it continues to kind of reinforce just how powerful of an archetype it is, especially when combined with Adnaz strategies. It's just an extremely compact, efficient, and resilient way to win. And it's only going to get better. As we've seen, Hull Breacher is kind of like the first addition to, the list of, oh, wait a minute, this works really well with Underworld Breach, and you don't have to have an LED online, and there's only going to become more and more things that are going to dovetail very well with it. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen in 2021 with this particular strategy.
Absolutely. Dylan, what was your pick for best red card of 2020?
Yeah, mine was also Underworld Breach. I completely agree. I think it is an incredibly efficient 2-mana win condition that also doubles as, when you need it to be, just value to get stuff back from the graveyard. It's pretty useful at most aspects of the game, and it makes, in my opinion, one of the best strategies in the game, which is Ad Nauseam, even better for many reasons. But although that being said, obviously everyone knows that Underworld Breach is the most insane thing we've ever seen. I do have another honorable mention here, and that's Deflecting Swat. For many of the same reasons that Fierce Guardianship is good, I think Deflecting Swat is really powerful as an additional free interaction piece. And I also think that Deflecting Swat is super powerful at actually catapulting you ahead of the game rather than keeping you from going too far behind the game, which is normally what Fierce Guardianship does. Deflecting Swat's ability to change someone's Abrupt Decay from your Underworld Breach to their Hull Breacher can be extremely powerful and can help you win the game. So I'm also going to honorably mention Deflecting Swat here as another one.
Good card.
Absolutely. Yeah, I also picked Underworld Breach, and, I can't really add a whole lot to it other than, I agreed with Cobblepott. I don't know how many people saw a tweet that I posted. It was almost a week ago now, where it's the Wonder Woman 84 meme where this is good, but it can be better. Where, Yogg's Will is very good, and I'm not denying that it's an amazing card. Underworld Breach is, in my opinion, significantly better.
Which is kind of a bummer, to be honest, because I love Yawgmoth's Will. I think that's like the best card. I think it's such a cool card, but yeah, Underworld Breach I think is just better.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about, well, you got to have X many cards in your graveyard, and there's some setup involved with it. And I was like, I get that, but if you've ever played with the card, you realize that that's like a minimal requirement. Usually the decks that are playing that are already dumping stuff into their graveyard anyway, or on some amount of things that fill that regardless. So I've never really seen that be a huge downside, except of course when I'm playing the deck and I'm going for wins and I'm failing.
Right. The decks that are poised to really take the best advantage of Yogg's Will are in the same boat. You don't want to cast a Yogg's Will when you got 3 cards in your graveyard. You want to cast Yogg's Will after you've, done an ad nause for 20 cards, and then you want to reuse as much as you can. Treat it kind of like a scroll rack between your hand and the graveyard to, continue moving forward.
Right, absolutely. On to our next category is the best green card of 2020. Now, I know in a lot of other formats, green has gotten a lot of heat, as it has been kind of very, very, very good over the past handful of years. But 2020, I felt like, was a pretty quiet year for green in cEDH. So when we're talking about what we thought was our best card for green in cEDH this year, Cobblepott, what was your pick for best green card of 2020?
For me, I chose Allosaurus Shepherd. And this is a 1 mana card that cannot be countered, that then makes all of your green cards uncounterable. Not green creatures, which is kind of what a lot of people probably expected when they were first looking at the card, thinking it would be, similar to Destiny Spinner or cards of that ilk where, okay, so people can play their creature strategies without, being interacted with. But, I mean, Allosaurus Shepherd is going to make your Veil of Summer uncounterable. And it's going to make your Neoform uncounterable, and it's going to make Finale of Devastation uncounterable. Just there's a ton of plays, especially plays that are going to be posturing. If you're in a strategy that has green and black and blue, then you're going to want to be putting your Thassa's Oracle onto the battlefield and winning through that, and this is going to facilitate a lot of that apparatus in a way that is just extremely difficult for the metagame as it stands to interact with, because a lot of the metagame is expecting to because of the nature of Thassa's Oracle being such that you can only interact with it on the stack. That is the type of interaction that you see most represented in the metagame. So people are going to have all of the tools for interacting with things on the stack. And when you have a card that says, you can't interact with my things on the stack, you are creating this disparity that is going to position you extremely well against the way that everybody in the metagame is going to be prepared for interacting with you. Thus, it's a really, really powerful way. People are going to, compare it to Vexing Shusher, but it's, I think in a lot of ways better for a lot of things, just because you don't have to pay for activations and you don't have a stack war to interact with. If it's on the battlefield, it's going to come onto the battlefield, and then if you've got the nuts, then no one can do anything about it. And it's just a tremendous, tremendous card.
Yeah, absolutely. Dylan, what are your opinions on best green card of 2020?
I'm going to have to go ahead and agree with you there. Allosaurus Shepherd is a powerful protection spell for all the reasons that you said, as well as every once in a while you get to make your elves huge and maybe finish off a player. I think Allosaurus Shepherd is extremely powerful, but it is strange. You did say green really didn't get a ton of power, I think, in cEDH, but I do think multicolor green spells did get a little bit of power, which I can touch on in a little bit. But as far as mono green cards, yeah, Allosaurus Shepherd is quite a powerful one.
Absolutely. Pongo, what was your pick?
I tried so hard to find anything for green. And 2020 was a really disappointing year for green. And I think that's a big part of the reason why Grixis has kind of sort of taken a lot of the has taken center stage over Sultai in more recent times. When you get a whole bunch of powerful red cards and you get basically nothing for green, it's pretty clear that you're going to have a lot of interest in using those new red cards. And the fact that, again, we didn't get anything remotely close in power level or quite a number of cards, similar number of powerful cards for green, means that there was definitely going to be kind of a bit of a shift in focus. So the card that I nominated, after trying to find something different that I felt like I could reasonably nominate, that felt powerful enough to nominate, was, again, Allosaurus Shepherd. So I think Cobble and Dylan said pretty much everything that needs to be said about the card. And yeah, the only thing I really wanted to add is that my nominating Allosaurus Shepherd is in many ways kind of just a testament to the low penetration rate of green cards from 2020 into cEDH. Very, very weak year for green.
Well, I'm of the opinion you didn't look hard enough for other green card, because my selection for best green card of 2020 was Destiny Spinner. And I know everybody's going to raise their eyebrows at me, but Allosaurus Shepherd...
Isn't it just the worst Allosaurus Shepherd?
I would argue it's better. Here's why. So in the decks that are going to want to be playing these effects that are not mono green, right? Destiny Spinner is significantly more versatile because of the fact that it is not going to only hit your green spells. Like like a really good example of this is when you start to look at 3, 4, 5 color lists. They're not really talking about, which those are the lists that are seeing the most play right now. Those lists don't really consider Allosaurus Shepherd a whole lot. The lists that do, the card that they do consider is Destiny Spinner quite frequently, because of the fact that it does defend a lot of your pieces you want to be playing onto the field. It defends your underworld breaches. It defends all those sorts of things. And so while it, and this is another thing that I think is very important to point out, I was perusing the Playing with Power Essentials list as I was putting together my list, and Destiny Spinner shows up in the list, but Allosaurus Shepherd does not. And I think that really speaks to the fact that Destiny Spinner, while it may not be more overtly powerful as Allosaurus Shepherd, is certainly more versatile and is going to see much more play than Allosaurus Shepherd, which to me makes it the better green card for the year, because it was, like we said, it was kind of a slow year for mono green. So having something that's going to be able to slot into a lot of different places is, in my opinion, much more valuable than something that is as narrow as Allosaurus Shepherd is.
See, you say that I didn't look hard enough, but I did certainly find Destiny Spinner. But the issue is that I didn't find any decks that I actually want to play Destiny Spinner in, whereas Allosaurus Shepherd is one that I've considered for Derevi, for example, and in a couple of other places, for Najeela, for example. So yeah, I think that it's.
But did it ever make it into that list though? To be
I
fair?
did play it in Najeela for a bit.
But did it stay there?
It didn't stay ultimately.
It didn't stay.
But
yeah.
So
but
my thing
and
with
that's
Destiny Spinner. Sorry, go ahead.
Destiny Spinner didn't even get considered.
Yeah, you're fine.
Go ahead, Dylan.
My thing with Destiny Spinner is that in any deck that I could have played it at the 2-mana spot for protecting things, Grand Abolisher or Vexing Shusher, if able, seemed better to me. And at the 1-mana slot, where sometimes you would, in specifically Advantage Thrasios decks, like Sans Black Seedborn Muse decks, where the only spells that you really care about resolving are Neoforms, Finale of Devastations, Seedborn Muses, they're green spells. Once you resolve those, you can just live off of Thrasios activation, so the 1-mana versus 2 is better. But Destiny Spinner, the one deck that I think Destiny Spinner is prime in is Ukama, is Food Chain Ukama. I think Destiny Spinner is just perfect in that deck. But any other deck that can play Vexing Shusher and Grand Abolisher, I normally play those first, and then I don't want a third of that 2-mana effect.
That's fair. So I generally don't. This is a hot take, and I don't want to get too deep into this.
Lavinia.
I don't love Vexing Shusher personally, and that's just I've always found it to be kind of clunky when I'm trying, because it makes me have to spend my mana a little bit differently, where I'd rather just kind of have a static ability that I can just use, and that's just me being stupid. So
no, that makes sense.
Take that for what it's worth. But I've always kind of in my food chain lists, I've cut Vexing Shusher for Destiny Spinner, and I've liked that a lot more. It's just, for my play style, I like to play much more permanent, based cards, which, for one of our upcoming things that we're going to be doing, you're going to be seeing one of my prison decks that I've been working on that kind of showcases that. Destiny Spinner for me kind of fills that slot a little bit better for me.
Destiny Spinner is definitely, I think, better in food chain decks, but I think Vexing Shusher signs. I think everything you said is 100% right. Where Vexing Shusher signs, though, is for me in Thrasios type decks when you're trying to control the table,
right?
And you can kind of threaten to make other people's things uncountable and whatnot. Which, obviously, right? But yeah, Vexing Gesture, I see what you're saying about it, though. It makes it funky sometimes.
Yeah, I get what you're saying too, and I think your picks are all valid. I just, it for me was just like, man, I don't see how Source Shepherd get played that often, and Destiny Spinner's in the essentials list. Like it's played in enough decks that it pops up. So to me, that is a credit to it, and how it's just a little bit more versatile. But moving on to our next category, this is probably going to be the most boring category of the day because I'm pretty sure we can all explain what this card is. And it's going to be a quick answer, and there's really no debate over this. If there is, I'm going to be shocked. But the next category is for the best colorless card of 2020. Now, had this been of 2019, we could sit here and discuss Karn. We could sit here and discuss Ugin. We could talk about a litany of other cards that had come out in 2019 that work really well in that colorless, area. But 2019 gave us a card called Jeweled Lotus. So Dylan, I feel safe to say, I assume that your pick for the year is going to be Jeweled Lotus.
Absolutely, and I say Black Lotus every time I cast that card because that's what it is. It is so powerful.
I have not seen the card be bad yet.
I tutor for like all the time now. Like times where you would like normally tutor for Mana Crypt, and you go, wait a minute. Maybe this is better than Mana Crypt right now, especially in like Crom type decks. I think Crom decks use it the best. That 3 mana just lets your turn 2 Crom be like very consistent, and turn 1 Croms like happen enough.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. Pongo, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, we didn't really have a whole lot of choices to pick from or options. Yeah. But I think even if we did, Jeweled Lotus would probably come out ahead. The card is absolutely insane. It's not as game-breaking or insane or stupid as, everyone was going on about it when it was first spoiled. People were worried that this was like the end of EDH, not just cEDH, but EDH as we knew it. It's most certainly not that. And I think actually its power level to a large extent was like blown out of proportion. That being said, I have seen this card kind of translate to like free wins on more than one occasion in cEDH in particular. So I definitely think that in the right context in cEDH, and if you also kind of get to use it and do other things in the same turn, then it's like absolutely at its best here. And as I was saying before, will convert into wins a substantial portion of the time. I can think of a few recent games where, I would see like turn 1 Jeweled Lotus into like Crom or, some other commander. And then you also get... Yeah, or turn 1 Najila.
I'm genuinely surprised you didn't mention Najila.
I was waiting for
I was getting
genuinely shocked.
I figured you were.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to jump on you.
But then when you follow it up with like, land, crypt, Rhystic Study, it's like utterly broken. And I've actually seen that on a couple of occasions. I think we had something to that effect happen on the channel in one of our last gameplay videos. It's happened on stream, on the Team Turn 3 stream, where I've seen turn 1 Urza and like I think Rhystic Study as well. So like absolutely insane things can happen when you just have like a random 3 extra mana, and especially if you're like trying to power out a really important commander or a really powerful commander. It can just absolutely swing the game in your favor right from the start by like a tremendous margin.
Cobblepott, do you have any dissenting opinions here?
I mean, I feel like it would have been better if it let you pay for any legendary card instead of just commanders, but that may have been too much. So I agree with everything everybody said so far. And I like the fact that it is it's really powerful, but it's also really controlled. You can use it for your commanders, and that's kind of it. And I think that that's an appropriate level of self-balance that it has there. And being able to play cards that were typically not cards that you saw on turn one most of the time. Even simple things like Tymna. A turn one Tymna is so much better than a turn two Tymna, just because of the amount of development that you're going to see around the table. So it can establish advantage in different circumstances. Not just turn one Tymna, but turn one Crom, turn one Tevish Sat, turn one Naheb, whatever. All of those, it's a extremely variance-inducing card, which I think that's the only quality that has that I'm not a big fan of, because it does absolutely create more variability to what's happening on turn one. But that said, it also gives people who are in at any seat that's at the table the ability to maybe overcome some of the innate variance that you're going to have with respect to seating order. So you can have somebody who's in seat 4 who's able to power out Crown on turn 1 and be able to maybe compensate and overcome some of the disadvantage that is inherent to where they're sitting. So there's a lot of interesting things that it creates in the metagame, and I think without question there is no colorless card printed in 2020 that can even come close.
Absolutely. And I agree with absolutely everything that you guys are saying there. On to our last category for this first segment here, is the best multicolor card of 2020. This includes, some of those cards from, from Jumpstart that had the dual mana symbols in them. So starting off here, Pongo, what was your pick for best multicolor card of 2020?
So, sort of to what you just said, to your point, when I read multicolor, I didn't necessarily read gold card. So I took that to also mean cards that, for whatever reason, may be in multiple colors based on their color identity. So the card that I chose is Emil the Blessed. And, a lot of people might be a little upset. They might think, oh, well, Emil's a white card. Maybe that should have been like the best white card. But, let me just point you to that green mana symbol right in the text box and ask you, what mono white deck are you playing this card in, right? None, because you can't, because it's a multicolored card.
Can I just real quick? Why is that allowed, but extort is not? Is you don't have to do it one or the other?
Because extort is in the reminder text. Right. It's not.
But
in
why
the
isn't that in the reminder text? All right, I'm sorry. It feels like it's the same thing to me.
Well, because it's not. There's nothing to remind.
It's
you
not
about.
reminding you. It's just the actual ability.
It's
just
text.
frustrating to me that is the way that extort works with the color identity. But sorry,
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, but yeah, that's certainly the way it works. So why Emil? Well, some personal reasons again. Emil is kind of like a linchpin type card for, the King K rule, the Kenrith rule of law deck, where when you combo it with Dockside Extortionist, you can generate infinite mana, and if you have Kenrith already out in play, then you can win through your own rule of laws without needing to cast any other spells. And without having to loop Dockside on the stack, so without having to cast it multiple times. But it also fits directly into those Advantage Thrasios type shells, or the Dawnwaker Thrasios type shells, where it's doing very, very similar things with Dockside Extortionist. And another deck that I've been, or I'm constantly working on, sort of my white whale as far as cEDH is concerned, is Derevi, where Emil has also proven itself as a pretty powerful combo piece, even without access to Dockside Extortionist. So in that deck, with Derevi, Emil, and Gaia's Cradle, you can generate infinite green mana, assuming you have 4 creatures in play, and then you can start flickering Derevi to untap other color sources, and then you have infinite mana of all colors, and you get to tap all your opponents out every turn. It's pretty cool, and it works pretty well, and it's a really slot efficient way to add a win condition to Derevi that also happens to be a creature, and that also happens to exploit Gaia's Cradle, which is like everything that Derevi could possibly want. So for those reasons, it's certainly been revolutionary for that deck as well. And I think that it's the type of card that kind of threatens to get better as other cards are printed as well. So it's one that I'm like interested in sort of keeping an eye on to see how it kind of becomes broken in the future. It kind of has like the Deadeye Navigator effect in that respect, where like, if we get more powerful ETB effects, then Emil only becomes more powerful. And an Emil's at 4 mana, right? Instead of 6 mana. So it's much easier to justify playing that in a wide variety of contexts. And it only takes colorless mana to use the activated ability, which means that in a lot of situations, you can kind of break it more easily. And it's a fast flicker, which is the repeatable fast flicker is not the type of thing we see a whole lot anymore. So
right, especially in
because it kind of is, it's inherently broken in a lot of respects. So getting a card like that was kind of a big surprise for me in 2020. I was not expecting that, because when you print something like that, it's very clearly intended to be kind of an infinite mana type piece or an infinite combo type piece. And I think Wizards of the Coast is fully aware of that fact, and they've shied away from it, after Deadeye Navigator. But, we're here now and we're trying it again. And I think the card is very, very powerful.
It's interesting you called Derevi your white whale. I think I might steal that from you and call Lavinia my white whale. I think that makes sense. I like that. Up next, we've got Cobblepott. Cobble, what was your pick for best multicolor card of 2020?
My best multicolor card for 2020, I chose Winota, Joiner of Forces. And not because it's necessarily the discrete best multicolor card, but it is a card that, of its own merit, all by itself, it created a deck in cEDH of Boros colors that can consistently threaten a win, regardless of table composition. And is it going to win every game? No. Is it going to be a contender? Yes. And this is a circumstance that I think is without precedent in cEDH. I don't think they're, in thinking back through the cEDH history, even though it's not a long one, I don't think there has ever been a Boros deck that was ever a contender, even, in the kind of like the lower level echelons of what you would consider, power. So this is without precedent, and I think that it's a healthy thing. And hopefully it will be a harbinger of maybe more of what we can expect from that region of the color pie. And I think it's a welcome addition.
Absolutely. Dylan, what was your pick for best multicolor card of 2020?
So my pick was actually also Winota. I think for all the reasons that Cobble said, Winota added a ton to the Boros strategy that didn't really exist at all before, so that's really cool. But I did have a lot of honorable mentions that I want to bring up, because although, like I said earlier, mono green didn't really get that many toys this time, I do think that green and other got a couple toys. Yasharn was a big one. Yasharn, the green-white commander, I think did a lot for green-white. I think the only other cEDH green-white deck that we had was the green-white Selvala, and to be honest, I don't think that deck was very good, but I don't know if I've ever actually played against it. I'm not sure. Yasharn stopping Dockside Extortionist as well as many other things I think is super powerful. And then real quick, I also wanted to just highlight Emil, but Pongo went over all the reasons why Emil is super good. And also Kinnan. I think Kinnan has done a whole lot, but Kinnan just does more of blue-green stuff, so that's not super exciting. And also, I know I'm bringing up a lot here, but multicolors, like many colors, Zerda. And I'm bringing up specifically Kinnan, Zerda, and Emil, because I've been playing Advantage Thrasios, which I originally actually got from Cobblepott from you. I took your list, and then I started just like tweaking that and playing that for the past, I don't know how many months. But Emil, Zerda, and Kinnan basically created that deck.
For sure.
And it's been so much fun for me for the past couple months. It's, I think, a real contender, and almost, if not just as good as ad nauseum decks if you play them correctly. So Kinnan, Zerta, and Emil get their own little honorable mention for me. But realistically, I'm giving Winota my vote here.
Absolutely. My choice was actually Kinnan, just because of the fact that I feel like it is spawned a deck that Pongo is very fond of. That, in my opinion, is one of the top decks in the format. Maybe not like top 10, but I think it's certainly a consideration as one of the top good players in the format.
I think it is. I think,
yeah. It's one of those decks. I remember seeing that printed, and I was like, I feel like this is on par with Thrasios as far as power level goes. And it's
a mana doubler, a 2 mana. It's a 2 mana doubler. The card is absolutely insane. My buddy Tyler plays it, obviously, and it just seeing what it does sometimes is in only 2 colors. It's incredible.
Yeah. It being only 2 mana, it really blew me away with how far they pushed that card, and I don't think it gets the love it deserves either, because I feel like it's been overshadowed. What'd you say?
Because partners are too good. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize, but partners are so good. It's hard.
It is. Well, and that's also part of it. Is it's just I feel like so many other good cards in red and all these other colors came out this year that people just kind of forgot about it. But I think this was easily one of the better cards to come out this year. And really, like you said, it is a 2 mana doubler, which is insane, and it's a 1-card combo with Basalt Monolith, which is bananas. So I mean, it's just one of those things where. I like Winota. I think Winota's really good. I think Emil is really good, but Kinnan just made a new deck. And, to do that in blue-green, I feel like to be a blue-green commander worthy of helming your own deck is worth being called one of the best cards of the year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add about Kinnan, other than all the things that have been said thus far is, it's... As you said before, it helms its own blue-green deck, and blue-green is, there's a lot of competition there, just with Thrasios. No, I just wanted to point out that Kinnan actually ended up winning sort of one of the big cEDH tournaments of the year, the Oktoberfest, Oktoberfest 2020 cEDH tournament, and was piloted by Tsunami. And managed to take the whole thing. So I think that's certainly a testament to how powerful that deck is. And it took a little bit of development when the deck kind of first came out. People were kind of playing it just as a scepter deck, but then when the mirror lines were developed, I think that really brought it back into the spotlight after people had kind of lost a little bit of interest in trying to develop that deck. Because it kind of it kind of felt like it had plateaued, but now it's a real contender.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. So we went through the first 7 categories of our awards show tonight. Those categories were the best of white, blue, black, red, green, colorless, and multicolor cards. Up next, we are going to start moving into the card type categories. Kicking this off, I feel like, is a pretty standard, and I'm going to kind of just breeze through these first 2 because we've kind of already talked about them in some depth. But is the creature category, and so all of us did select Thassa's Oracle as our creature, best creature of 2020, and we've all given lots of explanations on this. But since Pongo didn't select it as his top blue card of 2020. Pongo, why is it that you think Thassa's Oracle is the best creature of 2020?
Well, so it's the best blue card, and it's the best creature of 2020. I don't disagree with all of you. As I said earlier, right at the beginning of the episode, I was trying to make sure that I picked a different card for every category, and I kind of just thought that, if we're talking about, essentially, if we're picking the best card of a color, that doesn't feel in my mind as if it's the best card of an entire creature or entire card type. So we're going to see a lot of these cards that have been previously named in sort of the top for best card of a certain color coming back finally in my rankings for the best card type, just because, at least in my mind, it's slightly more prestigious, or there's more prestige.
Okay, so this is more like, best director instead of
exactly.
Just best producer or whatever, right?
Exactly.
There you go.
Best costume.
Best visual effects.
Right. Cinematography.
There you go. In the next category, we have best artifact of 2020. We all chose the Jeweled Lotus as the best colorless card of 2020. So if you want to hear what we have to say about Jeweled Lotus, you can really go ahead and check it out in the colorless section. This was not an Eldrazi year, so there weren't a lot of not a lot to differentiate between colorless and artifacts this year that you would generally have, maybe in a year where there's some Eldrazi, or maybe an Ugin was printed, something along those lines, or a Karn. But we didn't have that this year. So now moving into the more unique category is the best instant of 2020. And I'm going to go ahead and Pongo, you start off last round with your pick. What is your pick for the best instant of 2020?
So there's a lot of really powerful instants that came out this year, but I think that the one that felt the most powerful to me was Deflecting Swat. And so obviously we have an entire cycle of these like free spells so long as you control your commander, and that's already just powerful in and of itself because free spells are insanely strong. But this one in particular, and another one that I'm sure will get mentioned, these are interaction and their protection, for combos, and they kind of operate on an axis that's relevant for cEDH, unlike some of the other free spells that exist in Magic and were printed recently, or were printed sometime in Magic's history. So Deflecting Swat in particular, I really like it because it does do a great job of being a protective counter spell against opponents' counter spells, because you can redirect them to Deflecting Swat. So it has that misdirection type effect. So you can use it aggressively for that, as on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's also really excellent at countering certain sort of like really annoying spells that historically have been very, very powerful and very, very hard to deal with. I think the number one example of that is Abrupt Decay, which Deflecting Swat can sort of redirect, effectively counter if it's targeting one of your things, and that's relevant for all kinds of decks. Obviously, I play Najeela, and so it's relevant if they do that, if they try to Abrupt Decay Najeela or Derevi, and you're holding 3 counter spells, but none of them stop the Abrupt Decay. But Deflecting Swat is kind of like the card that, not single-handedly, but it was sort of like the second punch of the 1-2 punch that I think like really got people to reconsider Dovin's Veto as particularly good and worth running. Obviously 2-mana interaction is the type of thing that people are just reevaluating in general. But, in particular, now that we have Veil of Summer and Deflecting Swat as 2 cards that can effectively counter an uncounterable counterspell, that card has kind of just fallen off in a lot of people's esteem. People aren't really looking at that card the same way, because it's kind of not the end all be all that it used to be of protection or defensive counterspells. Deflecting Swat, again, great when you're being proactive. It can deal with certain problematic things like Abrupt Decay that I talked about. There's also like a wide variety of abilities that you would want to redirect. For example, like a Gilded Drake targeting one of your cards. Historically, it can be pretty tough to counter creatures. Gilded Drake is one of the most widely played creatures, and when it's pointed at one of your really important pieces, that's really feels bad. But if you can Deflecting Swat it elsewhere, great. It's super powerful against cards like Peer into the Abyss, turning where any counterspell on the one hand would be really strong into Peer into the Abyss as far as just preventing it from happening at all. Deflecting Swat kind of lets you turn it into a win condition for yourself, which is absurd.
At instant speed.
Yeah, at instant speed for no mana.
For free.
Yeah, somebody else does all the hard work and you get all the reward. So this card is just wild. And, on top of that entire list is just the fact that it's protection. It's all of these things, but it's also not blue, which means that decks that are not running blue, which are already, pretty disadvantaged on the interaction and protection front, have gotten another piece that really helps them a whole lot. And that's one of the big reasons why I feel like Deflecting Swat kind of edges out a card that I imagine will be discussed shortly.
So Cobble, going off of that, what is your pick for best instant of 2020?
I mean, my pick was Fierce Guardianship, and really hearing Pongo talk about it, I actually do think that I want to switch my answer to Deflecting Swat, just because of how wide of a range of targets it has. I think Fierce Guardianship is just kind of the intuitive choice that everyone picks, and I mean that's kind of what it was for me. It's like, well, this is the one, just because it's just straightforward. It's another free counterspell that's in blue, and doesn't have card disadvantage. But I mean, Deflecting Swat also does indeed have all of those same qualities, and interacts with creature ETBs if they've got a target, and there's just a whole bunch of I think niche applications that reward people who are quick to think on their feet, and for that reason, I think I am going to switch up, and I'm gonna choose Deflecting Swat.
Okay.
Callahan, I need you to post like a Success Kid meme, and it just says like Pongo like successfully convinces Cobblepott of anything.
Yep, without precedent.
So Dylan, what is your pick then for best instant of 2020?
Yeah, mine is also Deflecting Swat. Although Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship are obviously pretty close, for me, the differentiating factor is that Fierce Guardianship normally stops you from falling behind. It stops you from losing, or it protects your piece, whereas Deflecting Swat actually can kind of catapult you ahead. If you can stop someone from taking your creature and they take instead something else, you make the Gilded Drake fail, or you're able to take someone's Peer into the Abyss, and instead of them winning, you win instead. The ceiling is much higher, I think, on Deflecting Swat. And also another big one is it's not blue, so non-blue decks get some free interaction, which makes them actually playable. Because to be honest, I really can't play a deck that doesn't have blue because of the free interaction thing, and Deflecting Swat is a good way in the right direction of that more interaction, I think, in non-blue.
Okay. Well, I'm unfortunately the weirdo here, I suppose. Picking the safe choice, I guess. I did pick Fierce Guardianship, and you know what? I'm gonna talk about Lavinia again. It's another piece for Lavinia. That is a place that Well, in all seriousness, it is another free free counterspell. And one of the things that I do think that is not discussed enough about some of these cards is those cards get a lot better as you scale the CMC of your commander down. Roger, for example, is a really good example of how busted those cards can be as your commander gets cheaper. And so in a 2-color, 2 CMC commander deck like Lavinia, a free counterspell, especially since you're trying to get her out on turn 1 every game, always, a free counterspell that can very easily defend her is, gas in the tank. And so, I think it's been established on this podcast and in our gameplay series that I am not the proactive player in our group. I am very much the mid-range prison stacks decks player in the group. So I like the counterspell. I will definitely take the free counterspell personally.
And importantly, it's blue, so you can actually play it in Lavinia.
Exactly. That is a big bone. You know what? If I could play Deflecting Swat in Lavinia, I absolutely could. Like, no doubt about it.
Would that sway your opinion?
If it was blue, maybe. You know.
Yeah, Fierce Guardianship does have
consider
that. It's blue, and blue is just a better color than red still. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, I just end up playing blue decks so much more that I'm very reluctant. Like I know red's had a great year, but I'm not as enamored with red as everybody else is. I'm still I'm not in on the Ecrocrom thing. I'm still
I'm playing
Thrasios
Ecrocrom right now.
File
That deck is
Smasher.
sick.
What'd you say?
I'm playing Icrocrom right now. That deck is sick. I have that deck root together.
Interesting. Yeah.
You just need to transcend color identity like I have and play 5 colors.
Well, my next
All colors
deck
become one.
that I'm working on that I'm gonna be putting out here soon. Once I kind of smooth off some of the edges, is a 5-color deck too. So no worries. I've got a stacks deck in the tank for y'all. But going on to our next category, we've talked about these cards previously, but in different contexts. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out here. Is best sorcery of 2020, and Cobblepott, you did pick Peer into the Abyss as your best black card of 2020. So what do you think is the best sorcery of 2020?
I mean, not gonna lie that Peer into the Abyss is definitely a consideration for the best sorcery, and maybe at one point in the year, if you were to ask me this, say a month or two ago, I probably would have chosen that as the best one. But since then, we've seen Commander Legends come out, and we've had the printing of Jessica's Will, and this is one of those cards where there was kind of stratified, kind of divided, I would say, acceptance of it when it was, first announced. And, some people thought, wow, this is really great. And some people thought, this is okay. And I think as people have gotten some runtime with it and have been able to play with it, I think universally people have kind of all come to the agreement that this is a significant departure from maybe what it was originally expected to do. This is a card that very, very consistently is going to give you 5, 6, 7 mana for 3 mana invested, and most of the time will get you 3 cards on top of it. And for the direction, the trajectory that the metagame is taking right now, with everybody going ham with their turbo Nas, their really greedy, high acceleration kind of types of game plans that they want to do. I mean, of course, we're going to continually go back to that gameplay with the turn 1 Jessica's Will going into the Pure and all that kind of stuff. That's not the typical use case, but I mean, sure, you can use off the back of Jessica's Will. There's a whole bunch more ways to get a turn 1 Chrome.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a great example of the ceiling for that card.
Right. But even the floor of this card is still, I mean, the floor of the card is what? Seething Song.
Right.
And, you would still see Seething Song in, some fringe use cases, but I think this is one of those cards where people are very rarely going to be using it in that floor case. Most of the time, you're going to be seeing 3 cards and getting, a ton of mana out of it. And in the shells that are running it, they are always, always, always going to have a way to make use of those cards and of that mana. So it's just always an excellent card, and it's early game, late game, it's always an excellent draw off the top.
Absolutely. So Dylan, what is your opinion on what the best sorcery spell of 2020 was? Actually, before we even move on to that, one thing that just clicked with me, like I am this moment years old when I realized that the will cards were all modeled after and named after Yawgmoth's will. I just made that realization, and that they're all like people from that story, like time period. that took me way too long to process that information.
You have to work in that squirrel meme or whatever. You're like, dun, dun, dun. You know, the
Somehow.
dramatic chord.
But yeah, so anyway, now that I've made that realization at finally a month after its release, Dylan, what is your pick for best sorcery of 2020?
I did not go with Jessica's Will, although I do think it's very powerful, and time may change. As time changes, my opinion may change about this. But Peer into the Abyss is just a card that I've cast more times. Jessica's Will is still very new, and Peer into the Abyss wins me the game almost every single time. I mean, basically any time it resolves, it wins me the game. So Peer into the Abyss is going to be one for me. I just think it's such a powerful card. It adds so much to the ad nauseum strategy being in a second copy. And like I said before, it can draw you your half your deck no matter what. Doesn't care how much your life total is. But Jessica's Will is very powerful, especially Jessica's Will with Underworld Breach, getting to fire off a Jessica's Will multiple times in a turn to make your breach go a little bit longer using the top of your library and just adding a ton more mana. It's definitely a very powerful card. But for me, Peer into the Abyss is the one.
Absolutely. Pongo, what is your opinion?
Yeah, so probably will come as no surprise to anybody that this is where Peer into the Abyss makes it onto my list. So I think, yeah, everybody raised some very good points, but, as much as I said that Jessica's Will was sort of like the best or, my favorite red card of 2020, I don't think it really holds a candle to Peer into the Abyss in terms of absolute strength. Jessica's Will, obviously, while it is very powerful and oftentimes will just kind of be Seething Song at minimum, is really at its best when you're playing low casting cost commanders. And one trend that we've seen in a lot of these sort of Turbo Nos decks that would maybe want Jessica's Will is that they tend to be playing more expensive commanders because these cards are not in the 99 or the 98, so they don't hurt your ad nos curve. And additionally, you kind of just want to have something that can take advantage of the fact that you've built a very sort of synergy based deck, which is to say that your deck is predominantly mana sources, and then you're using those mana sources to synergize with either one card type win conditions like Peer into the Abyss or Ad Nauseam, or wheel effects that also synergize with having lots of fast mana, or things like Underworld Breach, which further synergize with having just lots of fast mana and lots of mana. So being able to pour sort of a lot of mana into more expensive commanders means that Jessica's Will isn't always at its best, in my opinion, in those types of shells, because you're not always going to have access to your sort of outlet commander. Or, you're going to have something better to do with your mana, which is oftentimes going to be doing something like casting a Peer into the Abyss. And exactly to Dylan's point, this is the type of card that is a major payoff for those decks that are just looking to essentially mulligan into lots of mana and then find some sort of payoff for that.
Absolutely. My pick was Jessica's Will to even it out. And I had made that pick far before I saw either the Peer into the Abyss picks. But it really comes down to me for the fact that it's just gas. Every time I've ever seen it used, it always leads to either a win or some sort of insurmountable advantage from the player who has it. And like I said, there is that sort of floor there where, it has that ability to kind of just be a Seething Song, but even just being a Seething Song is pretty all right. Considering that decks that even want to be playing Seething Song like this just feels just straight up better than that. So for me,
when it's a Seething Song, it's still better than a Seething Song a lot of the time because it's not going to be bound to 5 mana. A lot of times it's going to be 7.
Well, yeah, but conversely, it could be worse, right?
This is
Peer
true.
into the Abyss is always drawing me half my deck.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's also true.
That is fair. But like I said, Jessica's Will, it doesn't kill you off of a Nas. It certainly makes the game a lot easier to play. And I think something that I don't think gets mentioned enough is how it really powers up mono red strategies in a really powerful way. And I don't think that the increase in power to Godo has not been discussed nearly enough throughout the community. And I think some of that is because, we all have kind of the short attention span where we're all attracted to the new thing. Everybody wants to be playing the new commanders and always want to do something new and interesting. Godo, I feel like, is significantly better than it was a month ago, just off of the back of Jeweled Lotus and Jessica's Will. And
yes.
that is... What'd you say?
I said, dude, yes.
I think Godo players are just biding their time. You could even say Godo players are waiting for the next big tournament where they can just bust out all these new cards that they've gotten and just absolutely mop the floor. And then
Somewhere
everyone will be
Ryan...
like, whoa, Godo got Black Lotus and Godo got
yeah,
a 7 mana ritual. Like, when did all this happen?
Somewhere Ryan is smiling right now, because I'm, discussing about how it's still like, if I'm going back to the tier list, I still think it's like a B or C tier, commander in deck. But the fact that Jessica's Will has powered that up, here's another one for you. When you look at, Dylan, you've been playing Timna Jessica some. I mean, the power that it gives to the Mad Farm strategy is very substantial and worthwhile to really address. And Peer into the Abyss is something that some of those lists don't always run because they might not want it off of the Adnaz, but they're always going to be running Jessica's Will. And I just think it's such a good addition to powering up some of these lower colored decks and giving them more access to things that, maybe Peer is very good in the decks that it's good in, but certainly isn't such a piece of access that it makes decks that were previously struggling significantly better in that regard.
Counterpoint. If you put Peer into the Abyss on your list more times, that's more opportunities to rub it in Morgan's face about how wrong he is about this card.
See, but I don't disagree with Morgan that much. Like, I think that he has a bit of a hyperbolic take on it. But I don't think it's like... I think it's certainly overblown how good it is from certain angles, personally.
I'm not super familiar with the take, but I can tell you that Peer into the Abyss is nutty good.
Let me clarify. I don't think it's bad. I do not think it is a bad card. But there are certainly voices on the internet in the CEDH community who believe that it is Cobblepott. I'm joking. Who think it's a lot better than I really evaluate it at. And I still think it's really good, but I don't think it's the best sorcery of 2020, personally.
But do you think it's Cobblepot?
Do I think it's Cobblepot?
I don't think it is. I think I'm Cobblepot.
I think it definitely personifies what I think of what Cobblepot plays, certainly, at least this year. I feel like most of your brews this year have somehow, outside of like the Kenrith lists, have been on some sort of Peer strategy. It's felt like.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But
anything with black has Peer in it.
That's fair. But moving on to our next category, we're going to kind of breeze through this one here a little bit just because we've already discussed this card in depth. Excuse me.
Would you say we've discussed it ad nauseum?
Yes. We certainly have. But is the best enchantment of 2020. And Dylan, do you want to go ahead and unveil to the world this big surprise of what the best enchantment of 2020 is for us?
Underworld Breach.
Shocker.
Underworld Breach.
2 mana. It's an effective win con. It's an effective at getting you to your win con. It's effective at buying back your combos when you need to. It's 2 mana. Did I say that? It's a very good card for many reasons. But the main ones being it's 2 mana and it's a combo piece.
The fact that it's 2 mana, I just... God,
you can cast it off a Rite of Flame. No big deal.
It is. What formats is that banned in? It's banned in Pioneer, and it was banned in. Was it Legacy?
It's banned in Legacy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you realize how insane a card has to be to get banned out of Legacy? Like,
Yeah, it has to be
just,
Deathrite Shaman.
I'm still trying
good.
to. I'm still trying to imagine what the original pitch was. It's like, okay, guys, hang with me here. I'm thinking Yawgmoth's Will,
But better.
but 1 mana cheaper, and instead of exiling the cards after you cast them, you can just keep on casting them again and again until you get whatever result you need to.
Oh yeah, if it just exiled the card after, like, totally different story. Like,
If it was
perfectly
just
reasonable
flashback.
totally reasonable to print it. But like the fact that you get to do it over and over again is really what makes this card absurd and makes the design like
questionable. It's every time, like, there was a period of time where, because I watch a lot of Legacy streams, where Legacy was just unwatchable between Underworld Breach and Luris. It was just so difficult to watch Legacy for a brief period of time at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and like you said, I think being able to reuse spells, like being able to Demonic Tutor for Underworld Breach, and then escape the Demonic Tutor for Brain Freeze, and then cast Brain Freeze and fill up your graveyard, and then escape the Demonic Tutor for Lion's Eye Diamond, and being able to get all of that there just from, with the same Demonic Tutor, just casting it over and over again and finding a win from nowhere if you have enough cards in your graveyard and enough mana.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what other card could prompt cEDH players to play Brain Freeze?
Yeah.
It really should have had the Yawgmoth's Will clause of, like, if a card is put into your graveyard this turn, exile it.
I mean, that's the thing that really makes it so much better than Yawg's Will. Then that was the thing that I think drew people's eyes to it as soon as it was revealed. That it's like, whoa, wait a minute, you can do it again? Really? Really?
Gavin,
Yeah,
did you forget something?
Which is like, it makes it like Jessica's Will insane with Underworld Breach, right? Because your Jessica's
Right.
Will makes 7 mana, and then you use 3 of it to cast your Jessica's Will again, and you make another 7 mana, and you use 3 of that to cast it again. And as you're doing that, if you just Brain Freeze, you can get rid of a couple empty cards, and you're also exiling, 3, 6, 9 cards off the top that can get you even further if the cards in your graveyard off your ad nauseam or whatever didn't quite get you there.
Right. Yeah,
I suppose it's only fitting. If I've learned anything from playing Hades this year, it's that you can never escape the underworld. It has a way of just pulling you back in all the time.
There's no breaching the underworld, you might say.
Well, once you have, it pulls you back.
All right.
So, Callahan, would you say that Destiny Spinner also contends for the best enchantment of 2020?
Get out of here. I mean, you're not wrong. I guess it
it makes
an
your Underworld
enchantment.
Breach uncounterable.
It does make Underworld Breach uncounterable.
And it's in green.
Yeah. So anyway.
Sorry.
I deserve that.
Moving on.
So on to our next category is the best Planeswalker of 2020. My original pick was Oko. And then Pongo kindly
But Oko
reminded
wasn't printed in 2020.
Yeah, I was kindly reminded this morning that Oko was printed in 2019. It feels like a 2020 card to me, but alas, it was not.
We just felt all of its effects in 2020.
Yeah.
2020 is kind of a blur, to be fair.
I thought Dockside was printed this year, I will be honest with you.
Yeah, I thought that for a moment too.
I feel like it didn't really pop off as much as it had until like post Flash. Right.
I think it took a second because everyone had to see it and play, and then everyone had to play the second Dockside. You know what I mean? Like the first person who plays the Dockside is not good, but then, I mean, it's good. But when you're the Dockside, when you play the Dockside after the other guy plays the Dockside or whatever, then you're like, oh, yeah, if I play it, then they have to play it, so then everyone has to play it.
Right.
Smothering Tithe.
So anyway, best Planeswalker of the year. Pongo, what was your pick for best Planeswalker of 2020?
I feel like this one's going to surprise a lot of people. Certainly a lot of our viewers might be a little bit surprised to hear this one. But my pick for the best Planeswalker of 2020 was Tevesh Zot, actually. First of all, Doom of Fools, that's an incredible name, right? But no, more seriously, I think a lot of people probably would have assumed that I would have picked Jessica here, because Jessica kind of feels like the type of card that people were really excited about when it was first revealed, and Tevesh Zot kind of like, people were like, yeah, okay, Tevesh Zot's cool, whatever. Let's talk more about Jessica. And what I feel like has kind of happened with Jessica is that, Jessica has her deck, and like that's it. Like people, as far as I know, are like basically playing Jessica Tymna, and like that's the deck. It's a great deck, but like Tevesh Zot is now showing up in like a wide variety of contexts, with lots of different partner commanders, and is just such a powerful card advantage engine, and just gives you so much material to work with that Jessica does not. Jessica is great as an outlet, infinite mana outlet, but like what Tevesh Zot brings to the table is, bodies that you can use, for like Culling the Weak type effects, Diabolic Intent type effects, for his own ability, letting you draw cards. He's got a ton of loyalty and just like pluses like crazy. Drawing 2 cards by sacrificing one of the 2/0 ones that he produces is absurd. And sometimes you draw 3 cards by like sacrificing like a Thrasios or something if you happen to be partnered with Thrasios, which is an incredible amount of card advantage. He doesn't have the problem that a lot of people have been having with Tymna these days, which is where it feels like Tymna doesn't connect as reliably with multiple opponents. He's able to generate a lot more material on the board than Tymna can, and all the while is working towards an incredibly powerful ultimate, which a lot of people say don't evaluate Planeswalkers based on their ultimate, but Tevesh Zot comes down and can immediately have 6 loyalty, and then in like 2 more turns gets to that ultimate, which is super fast, and having a +2 means that he's really, really sticky. Like he stays on the board really, really well. He generates blockers with his +2 as well. So it's like, it's so hard to get rid of him when he comes down. And if the game ends up going long, if you can't close it out early, like you're hoping to, he'll probably just get there over a long enough game. And I think you pretty much always win when you take control of everyone else's commander or commanders in a lot of cases. So yeah, he's kind of nutty, and I think a lot of people overlooked him.
Yeah. Cobble, what's your pick for best commander of 2020?
I also chose Tevesh Zot, and for very much the same reasons that Pongo kind of illustrated there. I see him as kind of being the perfect, and this is going to sound funny, but kind of like the perfect farm partner. When you're looking at card advantage engines that you can have in the command zone, immediately people think of Thrasios, they think of Tymna, they think of Kraum. Those are I think the big 3 that everybody thinks about, and each one of them kind of has some drawbacks around how it is that they want to be drawing cards. Thrasios, you either need to have cost reducers in play, or you need to find kind of this critical mass of mana that you can then sink into him and not be using for other things to be able to draw your cards. Tymna is really good early, but then once the board gets gummed up, then her ability is much diminished if you can't get good evasive creatures to stick on the battlefield. Kraum is excellent, but is very kind of beholden to what your opponents are doing. Especially if someone gets rule of law onto the table, or your opponents are just not able to execute on their plans, then he kind of just isn't drawing you the cards. Tevesh Zot is like very low variance. He's always going to draw you 2 cards. Sometimes he'll draw you 3, but just being very, very deterministic on that, in and of itself is high praise. In addition to that, he is creating these little 0/1s that like Pongo was saying, they're blockers, but they're also basically your farm animals. So whether you're doing Infernal Plunge, Culling the Weak, Diabolic Intent, Skull Clamp, he's kind of like, you know, the best of the existing card advantage. He's got the best qualities of the existing card advantage partners, kind of coupled with the things that make Roger really good, and that he's kind of like just this throwaway fodder for sacrifice effects and can be used with, you know, Springleaf Drum and, you know, various other things. And the fact that both of his abilities are pluses means that he's just constantly marching his loyalty up and up and up. And his ultimate is absolutely terrifying. And you don't actually need to engage his ultimate to be getting the value out of him, but that just the possibility of that ultimate forces the hands of your opponents to, you know, either maybe try to go for a win faster than they maybe should, and thus, you know, are more likely to get disrupted, or they have to take a tempo hit and spend their mana and their resources to find a way to disrupt your Tevesh Sot, because if they don't, then, I mean, if the ultimate ever does go off, it's absolutely horrifying. So it's just an incredible card. And, you know, most of the decks that are playing this that are, you know, in black, it's, you know, a Culling the Weak and a land is all you need to just slam them onto the table. And there's a lot to be said for having the flexibility in the command zone to be able to say, oh, I've got an opening hand with a lot of acceleration, but I don't have a tutor to go get a Naws, or, you know, to get a Necropotence, or to get a Peer. Well, that's fine. Here, I'm just going to Dark Ritual, rock, land, Tevesh Set, turn 1. Okay, great. And you're off to the races. Having that flexibility cannot be understated. It's just a tremendous, tremendous card. I absolutely, personally, I way, you know, undersold it when I first saw it. I, you know, overlooked it and moved on. My opinion has changed 180. It's a tremendous card, and I think it's great.
Dylan, we've heard a lot about Tevesh over the past few minutes. What is your opinion on the best Planeswalker of 2020? It's certainly what would it be?
Yeah, so I didn't go with Tevesh Sot. That might be because I haven't actually cast or seen a Tevesh Sot in play yet for some reason. I don't know why. It just hasn't come up in my play group. I chose Jessica Thrice Reborn. I think Jessica did a lot for the Mad Farm strategy. I think it brought it to be an actual deck. I didn't really think Mad Farm was a deck before when it was with Bruise and Tymna. It didn't have the consistency for me. But I played it a little bit with the Tymna and Jessica. I think Jessica, although doesn't offer direct card advantage, she does offer card advantage in the sense of normally you're 3-for-1ing when you cast her. And not only that, you're also normally getting rid of mana dorks a lot of the time, which means that in a weird way, she's kind of ramping you. She's not, but she's providing you, declining your opponent's their mana advantage is in some way increasing your own mana advantage, I think anyway. She's also 3 mana, so she's much easier to cast much quicker. This is cEDH, so we can make 5 mana on turn 1 pretty easy, but we can make 3 mana on turn 1 even easier. So her getting on the board as soon as possible, much easier, is another big one for me. And she's also obviously an infinite mana outlet. Once you get infinite mana, you can cast her a bunch and kill the whole table. Super powerful card, and I think she's done so much for the Mad Farm strategy. Although I still don't think Mad Farm in Mardu is the optimal way to play that deck. I think it's much more possible now.
For sure.
I think Jessica also goes a long way towards, I think, diminishing the power of Tymna decks in the metagame. Just the presence of Jessica. Just because, you know, essentially just by her presence, she can just shoot down the evasive, you know, flyers that people might be running, or the dorks that people might be using, or Tymna herself. So I think Jessica has, taken over the curious control kind of dimension to the metagame, where the idea was to just keep everybody else's creatures, their smaller creatures, off the battlefield, and it has a very profound effect, I think, against those lists.
It is kind of interesting
would-
how, I agree, Jessica is good at stopping Tymna decks, but is also really good in Tymna decks because she clears blockers out of the way to make sure that Tymna
Right.
and other creatures can get through. So it's a kind of an interesting dynamic she presents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I honestly totally agree with Dylan on this. For me personally, when I saw Jessica get spoiled, I immediately was like, this is really cool. I'm excited about this. This is awesome. It does a couple of things that I think. One, she obviously the infinite mana or the infinite mana outlet in the zone is huge. And I don't want to undersell that, and I know we've talked about that quite a bit, but especially in my experience playing the deck, Tymna Jessica, obviously I'm not the best turbo pilot in the world, so take this for what it's worth. But kind of how I feel about it is she really opens up a lot of what you're able to do. And she fixes the win con question that Mad Farm had previously, where Mad Farm before was kind of doing this, we're running Dual Caster and Leonin Relic Order loops and all this stuff, and it's like this Ruby Goldberg machine of a win con in your deck, and your slot efficiency is just hot garbage. And now what you're seeing with it is these Mad Farm lists are real slick, and get to run very precise and good cards. And so the quality of that deck's cards overall has just went through the roof, compared to where it was a month ago. And so I certainly think that it is one of the best Planeswalkers. I think it's the best. Tevish, I think, is really good. But for me, Jessica brought a fringe deck into the main kind of meta considerations. You're gonna see Jessica Tymna floating around out there, and before you really didn't see a whole lot of Mardu outside of maybe who's the guy who plays the Kalia deck to fairly good acclaim.
Bad Dog.
Yeah, Mad Dog. Outside of him,
Bad Dog.
you're not going to see a whole lot of Mardu floating around out there. So for that alone, Jessica gets the vote for me. So we're split on the Planeswalkers. But up next, we've got the lands category, and it was very interesting because 2019 had a lot of awesome lands. And again, when I was originally putting this, I was still under this weird headspace where I thought that Throne of Eldraine was in 2020 for some reason. And so I originally thought Mystic Sanctuary. Well, again, Pongo pointed out, well, that was in 2020. And then I realized there weren't a whole lot of lands that came out in 2020. Because of that, Cobble, what is the land cycle that you really landed on as the best of 2020?
Right. I think that it kind of goes without saying that the completion of the Battle Bond cycle, or the cycle that began in Battle Bond, gave us, a set of, tapless dual lands, basically, that filled out the rest of the colors that weren't provided in the original Battle Bond set. Mm-hmm. So the main one that you're going to see is going to be Training Center, just because Grixis is so hot right now. So that's the Izzet land, and Undergrowth Stadium, and to be honest, I don't even recall the other ones, because those are the two main ones that I see get the most play as of right now, at least. But the last time we talked about these lands, I think when we did the set review for Commander Legends, we kind of talked about how if we're just talking about color, and we're not talking about any other special abilities that might be bound to to a land, we're really, really close to having perfect mana, especially in 5-color. So I think that the Battle Bond lands are certainly a welcome addition, because it's nice to be able to complete that cycle and have access to those lands, especially for lower color pairings, like 2-color. but I don't think that they were required, and I don't feel like they really are, filling a sorely needed gap that was existing or anything like that. So as much as I would have liked to have had, like emergence zone, or the blasting, I forget what the land was that
Blasting station.
Blast zone.
Yeah, blast zone.
Is that
Yeah,
it?
all the zones.
Blasting zone.
right,
Blasting zone. Sorry.
I mean, like
Who knows?
Wizards was in the zone when they came up with those lands, but unfortunately, we don't have anything quite like that, which I think are probably more interesting and would be more useful in the metagame, just because of how difficult lands are to interact with and their abilities. So I mean, we could be in worse places to be like, well, I guess the best we have is more dual lands. I mean, that's a great place to be in, I guess. So, but given what we had, this is the best that we got, and I think that they're a welcome addition.
Yeah. Dylan, Pongo, what do you guys think?
Not much more to say. They're great for Tainted Pack decks if you're on a low color. I'm not going to put it in every 4 and 5 color decks, but I'll put some of them in some 4 color decks, and they're definitely better for lower colors. Great land to be added for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree entirely. That's it. Super good for 2-color Tainted Pack decks. Also super great for budget decks. Always really good to get good fixing for those. The only other thing I think to add is that there was just not a whole lot of competition for this slot. We could have been talking about like the modal double-faced cards, those lands. Very few of those have like made their way into some decks. Like Kinnan, for example, can support like the blue one as just kind of like a random potential other spell that maybe you'll cast one in every like 100 games, if that often. I know that Michael on Heliod is playing a surprising amount of the white ones, just because that's a deck that wants to have like that higher spell density while also playing like a slightly higher land count, and apparently can get away with playing tapped lands a little bit more often. But overall, I don't think that those have really like made their way and sort of penetrated into like the broader cEDH sphere nearly to the same extent as just sort of generic fixing lands like the Battle Bond lands.
I have played a little bit of Shadow Skull Smashing, the red mythic, if that counts as a land. I don't think that it's great, but I do think that it's definitely considerable if you're in a low-color red deck. The removal side of it is not fantastic, but it definitely can be helpful. And the 3 life for it to become untapped is going to be mainly irrelevant unless you're playing Ad Nauseam, which if you're playing red, you're probably playing black, so you might be. But I do think Shadow Skull Smashing is a decent consideration, maybe, as a worthy note.
I agree. I think that's like the only one that's a consideration in many respects, and comes close to challenging. I would agree with you. It comes close to challenging some of these lands. And is the one that's seen the most amount of play in cEDH.
Yeah, absolutely. On to our last card based category is the best reprint of 2020. And I was going to toss this to Dylan, but Dylan said no idea, sorry. I'm not familiar with that card, Dylan.
I'm sorry, I don't keep up with reprints very much. After looking at what you guys said, I think I have an opinion, but I don't really know.
Okay. Well, I'll start it off here for us. And my opinion here is I would give this slot to 3 visits. And the reason being is 3 visits, it was definitely in need of quite the reprint. And a lot of people are just going to go, oh yeah, it's just an uncommon, it just gets you a forest. But yeah, it also gets you a forest. And it can be a non-basic forest, and it's really good in the decks that it sees play in. And a lot of times in like teamer decks want to play 3 visits, and maybe some of these Sands Black decks want to be playing just 3 visits. And I'm always a fan of those decks getting accessibility to more people so we can see more variety in our metagame. And 3 visits being reprinted certainly made people more definitely want to be playing some decks that can play 3 visits a lot more than they were maybe when it was, a couple $100 card. But Pongo, what is your pick for best reprint of 2020?
So I picked a card that I think people are actually playing. So I think
Shots fired, Duck.
I actually think there was a lot of really good reprints this year. When I saw this category, the first thing that came to mind was actually like Carpet of Flowers and Ristic Study, which got reprinted, I think, in like Mystery Booster.
And in Jumpstart.
And in Jumpstart, correct.
Ristic Study was in Jumpstart.
Yeah, both cards that, see a lot of play and are very, very powerful in this format. And, the more copies of them circulating, the better. But the card that I ultimately ended up going with was Vampiric Tutor. And I know it's not like the most glamorous pick. It's not the most exciting pick. But this is such a staple in the format. Having this be $80, $90, $100, is certainly something of a barrier to entry. And now, I think they're going for half that price, $40, $50, at least for the time being. But that price is not going to stick for sure. Like, pick up that card while you can, run out and buy yourself 1 or 2. And yeah, because I fully expect that card to be back up in the $100 range, before too long, just because it's such a powerful card. And you play it in every single black deck, bar none. And you play it, I think, in the majority of decks in the format.
Excuse
Can't
me.
disagree.
Yeah, absolutely. Cobble, what was your pick for best reprint of 2020?
I also went with 3 visits, just like you. And that's less about, the card seeing widespread play, but even though Vampiric Tutor, had kind of a high barrier to entry, 3 visits just had an absolutely absurd, unnecessary barrier. And, this was the first time I've ever actually been able to get my hands on one, because I was not going to spend $90 on Nature's Lore. So I think that, this is the kind of reprint that is great, not just for cEDH, but also for EDH in general, because and we can get into a discussion about Nature's Lore and 3 visits as far as being compared to mana rocks, as far as 2 mana acceleration that gives you 1 mana after that. I think that they could see more play, but that's maybe a discussion for maybe another forum. But it's a great reprint, and I'm glad to finally own one. And I know that I'm not the only person in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And the new art, good grief, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Dylan, now
I will
said
say,
no idea, sorry, but what'd you end up landing on?
So after listening to what y'all are saying, I will say that Vampiric Tutor would be my pick. I think that's a great one. But I will say that I do appreciate the 3 visits reprint a little bit more, just because I wasn't sure if they would ever actually reprint 3 visits, and knowing that they did means that they have the ability to reprint Imperial Seal.
That is exactly where I'm coming from.
Yeah, now they'll do it. It comes from the same set, so it's on their radar. They must know it exists and it's a problem, and they know the price. They tell you that they don't. They know. How do they not know? It's ridiculous.
Right.
But that's a $500 card, and that's like one of the 3 cards that I still don't own and won't buy in cEDH because it's just impossible. Time Twister, Gaia's Cradle, and Imperial Seal, it's too high for me.
Right.
I'm gonna blow your mind right now. The powers that be have the power to reprint any card.
That's true. They do. They have the powers, but 3 visits signify that they will reprint cards like Imperial Seal because it comes from the same set. I'm still not sure that they will reprint the others.
Especially since they've already reprinted Grim Tutor as well in a core set. I think that the willingness is there, and it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, them reprinting Grim Tutor. I was actually really blown away by them reprinting Grim Tutor. In a core set. I was like, oh wow, that seems good. Now I thought it would be a lot better in standard than it actually ended up being.
It's not a good card.
Just because, what'd you say?
It's not a good card.
Yeah, but
I wanted it to be. The full art is so pretty. I wanted to play in cEDH, and it was just like, no, the rate's too bad. It's not worth it.
Yeah, but yeah. So just the fact that they're willing to reprint some of those things is huge to me, and it also seemed it would stand to reason that they're probably going to reprint it pretty soon, because like a lot of all the Judge promos from 2020 were all tutors of some sort, and I believe the new ones are not tutors for this next coming year, but they certainly showed, like, they reprinted what's the one that sees play in Legacy all the time, the 2-mana one, the 2-mana tutor.
The one that...
Why am I blanking so hard?
Where you're Hellbent?
The one that has... Yeah, the one that has Hellbent on it.
Oh my goodness.
Shoot. It's not Infernal Tutor.
It's not.
Is it?
Yeah, it is Infernal Tutor.
Yeah, it is Infernal
that's
Tutor.
it. Man. But they, like, reprinted stuff like that, and so it's like they clearly are willing to do it. And so that's a big thing for me. But now... on to the big ones.
Do we want
the stuff that you're all been waiting for?
Hey, Cal, do we want to do best deck first and then most improved, since the most improved became the most improved because the best deck left?
We can do that, for sure.
Does that make more sense?
Sure. So, without further ado, we are going to give you the best deck of 2020, and this was a unanimous decision. And Cobble, I'm going to toss this to you. So the whole group decided this. What was the best deck of 2020?
With the printing of Thassa's Oracle while Flash was still legal, there was a coalescing of all of the different variants of Hulk decks, of Flash Hulk decks that existed. They're previous to Thassa's Oracle being printed. There were many... people would argue equally viable variations on different types of Hulk piles that could be approached, and different strategies underpinning how it was to go about getting their Flash Hulk executed. Thassa's Oracle immediately caused all of those competing variations to disappear overnight, quite literally. The discords all got deleted, and everybody focused on the one true deck, Sushi Hulk, and it created a metagame that was, I mean, when people...
It was horrible.
I mean, it's on the order of magnitude of kind of like the combo winter that happened during Urza Block. I don't know if anybody else was alive during Urza Block, but I lived through that, and that was terrible. And the affinity during the first Mirrodin block. I mean, the amount of degeneracy that deck brought to the metagame was similar to the experience of both of those eras for cEDH. To the point...
For me, it always reminds me of the Eldrazi Winter in Modern.
Right. What it did was, because of the fact that anybody who wanted to be able to, anyone who had access to 2 mana at any point could execute the combo in its entirety over the top of anybody else, regardless of what was on the stack. So what wound up happening is, the best way to stop Flash Hulk is by running Flash Hulk. And what you would see is, one person attempt Flash, and then another person cast Flash over the top of them and execute the combo and win over the top of somebody else's win con that was on the stack. And because of the fact that it required no board state. So whenever I talked about this a lot when Flash was still legal. It was a 2-pronged thing. It was 0 state, as in you needed no board state invested before executing the combo. And it was instant speed, which means that it could have been top to bottom executed, at any point on any player's turn. So because there's no state involved and you can do it at any point, it paralyzed all gameplay. Everybody had to be shields up from turn 1 every game, with the expectation that anybody who had 2 mana open could win at any point. So it created this extremely slow, undeveloped kind of a game, because our gameplay that we have now people develop very quickly because the expectation is that, well, on my turn, chances are no one's going to win over the top of me. We didn't have those types of presumptions during, when Sushi Hulk existed. So people, as a consequence, people didn't develop, or they developed very, very slowly because they always needed to keep interaction open for the chance that at any point in the game, starting from turn 1, anybody could go off. It was a miserable experience. And that type of a deck that is so good that the only way to compete with it is to also play with it. We see this in standard, all the Oko decks that, were banned out of existence over the past 12 months. It was without precedent. I think that no one will argue that it was the strongest deck in the history of cEDH, and we are glad that it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Dylan, what are your thoughts on how the meta game was warped during the sushi winter?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I probably have a little bit of a different opinion. I actually didn't mind the Hulk decks. I played Hulk, Sushi Hulk. I thought it was the most powerful deck in the world. That's why I played it. But I didn't mind that style of play. That was in the ballpark of when I got into cEDH. I got in a little bit before that, but I was playing a lot when Hulk was around. So I didn't mind it, but I completely understand why it needed to go. Any deck where the only way to beat the deck is to play the deck is not a healthy metagame. I still enjoy playing those games because they're fun, but it's not healthy for metagame. So Sushi Hulk is definitely my best deck of the year, of the century, of the format. It's the best deck. But after Sushi Hulk, should we say my best deck afterwards, or should I hold off on as that the most improved?
It probably would be the most improved, so let's hold off on that.
All right, I'll hold, because I said Hulk and then something else, but the something else is what's improved. So I will say Sushi Hulk, best deck.
Yeah. And Pongo, your thoughts about the best deck?
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's too much more to add on top of what Cobblepott said, other than to, let's do a little retrospective and let's not forget the fact that it's not even all that long ago that Flash was banned. We're not even, 6 months? We're maybe coming up on 6-7 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Wasn't it banned in February?
Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
I thought it was banned in
that.
February of 20.
Wasn't?
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was
banned
April.
a month after. It was a month after. I mean, even April it's longer than 6 months.
Well, we would be coming up on 7 months then, right? Oh no, wait. I'm just tired.
Anyway,
excuse me. Yeah, but in any case, it hasn't even been all that long, and so certainly I think that it took some amount of time for the meta to adjust, and we're kind of settling into a new space now. And I think it really took until just a few months ago for us to really kind of settle into what's sort of the heir apparent to Sushi Hulk. So I think that's, we can finally start to actually discuss what the sort of new meta is, following Sushi Hulk's sort of untimely demise. And I do think that it's warranted, or it was warranted at the time. And, I'm glad to see that deck gone. Although I would say I am intrigued by the thought of what would the metagame look like now if it was still around. Because I do feel like the format has powered up so significantly within the last year.
So much in this last year, yeah.
That I do wonder, if we would be complaining about it as much.
I think
would we have seen any of? I don't think we have seen any of the creativity and deck design we have seen in the past year if it wasn't for the banning of Flash.
Right.
Because everybody would just be like, "Oh, we shouldn't do this. Just play Flash."
I think,
and so we'd see all these strategy pushing that into it.
Right. When we talk about the most improved deck, I think that'll be an appropriate place to maybe talk about why I don't think that's the case. I think that Sushi Hulk would still be reigning supreme and making everything else just untenable.
Yeah. Well, so for the most improved deck of 2020, drumroll, please. the best deck of 2020, or the most improved deck of 2020, excuse me, is the Turbo Nas archetype. And so, Dylan, if you would, just give us a little bit of background on what Turbo Nas is and what's made it so good here this year.
Sure. Yeah, I can do my best. So Turbonaz is trying to cast Ad Nauseam as quickly as possible, and having such a low mana cost throughout your deck that your Ad Nauseam will win you the game. Normally with Thassa's Oracle Consultation, sometimes helped out by Underworld Breach. Lion's Eye Diamond with Brain Freeze can also help you mill out your entire library to find the Oracle if you were unable to, or to mill out all of your opponents if you needed to do it that way. I think it's probably, if you ask most cEDH players, if they would probably tell you that Turbo Nas is the best deck in cEDH, but they probably wouldn't agree on who the best commanders are it for. I think for a while, Crom and Tymna, at least for me, I assumed Crom and Tymna to be the best. Blue Farm was the best Turbo Ad Nauseam deck. But after all these new partners come out, I'm really not sure. You really want to be in Grixis more than anything. Your Tainted Packs and your Demonic Consultations are in black. Your Thassa's Oracles are in blue. Obviously, Ad Nauseam is in black. And then your Underworld Breaches are in red. So Grixis is where you need to be, but you can kind of branch out on if you want to be playing partners, or if you want to be playing Obeka, or if you want to be playing Kess, or if you want to be playing, like I said, whichever partners. But obviously, since we can play 4 colors, I think a lot of people went to the blue farm, which adds white to the Grixis, which really, in my mind, gives you Savine's Reclamation, making Intuition a 1-card combo, allowing you to, no matter what that they give you off of your Intuition pile, you'll still be able to find a win. And obviously, Grand Abolisher and Silence are really good in those decks as well as just Tymna being really good for white. I've recently been playing Crom Ikra, which is a 4-color, basically the exact same Turbo Nas deck, but I'm using Crop Rotation to find Emergent Zone and Beseiju. Playing like Deathrite Shaman because it's good in the mirror, and Noxious Revival because it's helpful and also good in the mirror. I'm not sure if it's right to go down that route. I'm just trying it out, and there's a lot of my favorite cards in it, so I'm playing it for that reason, and I also think it's good. But then there's also obviously the 5-color version of this deck, where you'd probably play Golos. I think some people might play Kenrith, but I think Golos is probably the best bet because you get to find Beseiju off of the Golos. But in my opinion, although 5 colors would be best if you needed all the 5 colors, I don't think that you do, and I think it might be better to play partners than to play not partners. Just it's easier to use like Deflecting Swat and stuff like that. And then also Crom, I think, just uses Jewel Lotus much better, but to be honest, Jewel Lotus is also really good. I'm going to go off on a whole different thing. It's impossible to say who, but Turbo Nas is probably the best way to win the game. I just have no idea what the best way to get there is.
I mean, that's super fair. There's a lot to do with the Nas strategy. I feel like is very wide open, personally. But Pongo, what's your kind of opinion here on the Turbo Nas strategy as somebody who's been pretty high on the Roger Silas farm?
Yeah, so I've played a fair bit of Turbo Nas, and I do agree that it is certainly the most improved deck of 2020. And as everyone was alluding to and saying, the new red cards that we've gotten are no small part of that. Losing Hulk as sort of like another sort of like major contender, I think just puts it like way back in the forefront where people are looking for like the best deck to be playing. Nas has been good in cEDH, I think, for as long as cEDH has existed. And, some people may be unaware of that fact or may have forgotten if they predominantly played around like, the time Hulk was legal, or if that's like when they got into the format. But certainly like Nas was, I would say, the major pillar of the format up until Protean Hulk being unbanned, and kind of fell out of the spotlight a little bit, but it's only reasonable that it comes back to the forefront as sort of the foremost win condition of the format, without really any kind of competitor on the horizon. It's just it exploits the dynamics of the format 40 life too heavily for it not to be such a major player. And the sort of Turbo Nas strategy, I think the only real innovation of that strategy is to it's the innovation of the things that this strategy has gotten has been predominantly new cards, to be totally honest. And I mean, like, because Nas has always been good, and then you add Dockside Extortionist to the mix, you add Underworld Breach to the mix, and you're essentially just like firing on all cylinders with these types of strategies. So yeah, I wouldn't say that it's anything new per se if you've been playing the format for a long time, but it does feel like you're even more incentivized to be going down that road than ever before.
Yeah, for sure. And Cobble, I know you have opinions on Turbo Nas. What are your thoughts?
So I think that the card that has benefited Turbo Nas the most was not printed in 2020, but it was Dockside Extortionist. And the thing that actually allowed Turbo Nas to become the most improved deck was the exit of Sushi Hulk. So, like I was saying before, the climate of the metagame while Sushi Hulk was a thing was that universally you had stymied development. The thing that separates traditional Nas, I'll call, from Turbo Nas is this kind of huge amount of devotion towards acceleration. Just acceleration at all costs, firing out all of these effects that we have access to now, where you've got Nas for sure, but you also have Peer into the Abyss, and you've got, Underworld Breach, you've got all of these things, you've got Dockside Extortionist that's helping you to get there, but, we're seeing an amount of acceleration people putting into their lists that is without precedent. This could never have happened while Sushi Hulk was in print, just because its existence required people to slow down their development and run more stack-based interaction to be able to stop opposing Flash Hulk lists from being able to go off. So when Flash Hulk went away, that kind of blew the lid off of what people could do from the standpoint of acceleration. And thus Turbo Nas was born, and that is why Turbo Nas was kind of able to kind of come into its own and leverage all of the new tools that it got. So that is why I think that Turbo Nas is the most improved. So sorry, Sushi Hulk. Glad you're gone, and glad that Turbo Nas has kind of taken its place.
You guys know what the real best, most improved deck of 2020 is, though, right?
Don't say Lavinia.
Here we go. He's going to say Lavinia.
If I can, I do want to
Dylan
add
is
real
never coming back, just for the record.
Why are you guys talking about Lavinia so much? If I can, I do want to add one more honorable mention to most improved deck. I think the evolution style decks are actually improved a ton. If we're going on like most improved, I don't think Ad Nauseam got quite as much as the evolution decks did. Ad Nauseam was already good, and I don't know if the evolution decks were. So basically Evolution or Advantage or any of the Blue Pod style decks of really using Neoform, Eldritch Evolution to find creatures. I think stuff like Zerda, Kinnan, and Emil really helped that like Sans Black, Seedborn Muse, Thrasios strategy. I played a lot of that deck this year, so I think that was also a very improved deck of the year.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Cobble, you did a lot of work on Advantage Thrasios, didn't you?
Yeah, I created Advantage Thrasios, so
that's what I thought.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I think that it, kind of came into being this year, and just kind of throughout the course of the year, just kind of more and more things kept on getting added. Oh, there's a Kinnan. Oh, there's a Zerda. Oh, there's an MEL. That just kind of continually improved it throughout the course of the year. But I would still, I'm sticking to Turbo Nas as the thing that kind of had the largest increase in its, volume.
Definitely.
In the metagame for sure.
Well, on to our final category for the night. We've been at this for a while now, but we are getting here close to the end. Is the best commander of 2020. Who is the best commander of 2020 and why. And so we like to be nice to our guests here, so we generally try to. Our last one we're going to give off to Dylan. So Dylan, what was the best commander of 2020 in your opinion?
So for me, it was Jessica, I think. As far as best commanders printed in 2020, I think Jessica is at least my favorite. It's done so much. Every time I cast it, it's a 3-for-1. And every once in a while, when you get to like make your Sarah Ascendant an 18/18 flying, that just feels nice too. So yeah, Jessica giving Mad Farm an actual outlet in the command zone that is reasonably playable, can be played off of a turn 1 mana crypt. It's good in a lot of ways. It lets you play the cards that you want to play, and is good against the cards that your opponents want to play. So Jessica's the one for me.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Pongo, what was your choice for best commander of 2020?
Oh, I think it's probably better that you ask Cobblepott first.
Boo. We all know what he's going to say.
All right, Cobble, what is your choice for best commander of 2020?
I would say the best commander of 2020 was Kraum. And when I say that, I mean Kraum X. Throughout the year, we had, Kraum plus Timna for, either the Opus Thief or Blue Farm. We also saw lists that had, Kraum Thrasios. We see lists that have Kraum Ikra. And now we're starting to see, the new crop of Kraum Tevesh lists that are extremely explosive. And I think that at, the framework of what happened in the last year with the exit of Sushi Hulk and Turbo Nas coming in, we're seeing just kind of this renaissance of explosive, highly active decks that want to be casting lots of spells every single turn. And there is, I think, nobody who benefits more from that than Kraum decks. And so I think that Kraum is extremely well positioned and was, I think, through the entirety of 2020. And I'm excited to see what decks that have Kraum as one of its commanders are going to be doing in 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Braden will be glad to hear you say that.
There you go, Braden. That one's for you.
All right, Pongo. It's now around to you. What is your choice for the best commander of 2020?
I noticed that you and I picked the same one.
We
so
did
why
pick
don't
the same commander.
why don't we hear it from you?
So I chose Najeela as the best commander of 2020.
My boy.
Yeah, I would say that if Sushi Hulk didn't exist this year and it was banned in 2019, I would say that Najeela Tempo is the best deck of 2020. It's the most consistently good. It just I've never seen it be bad. It's just such a good deck, and it's like this Swiss Army knife of win conditions where everything's just so compact and nice and slim, and everything feels good in that deck. And I don't like playing it personally because it's just not the type of game plan that I want to be on, but I think it's the best deck in the format, and I don't think it's very close. So Najeela is my pick for best commander. And so Pongo, obviously you picked that also, so expand a little bit there.
I'm a little biased, which is why I wanted you to start it off. But yeah, so I am biased, and I'm not going to try to hide that whatsoever. But I feel like Najeela has benefited from every card that we've talked about today. Pretty much, there's still a few, I would say, unsolved problems with Najeela in the sense that, it hasn't fully been cracked how to, play Underworld Breach in that deck. You could just jam it as kind of like a generic value piece and, do that. And, you can theoretically also just play it to, you could theoretically Demonic Consultation into it and then Demonic Consultation again and then Demonic Consultation again. These are all lines that you can do. But the main thing that Najeela sort of has always had going for her is that, as Callahan was saying, it's that deck is like a rock. It's just it's got a plan that it plays to so consistently, and plans that it plays to so consistently, and then like everything about that deck is just kind of built around effectuating that plan, or generating advantage, or protecting that plan, or defending yourself from opponents' win attempts, such that like it just feels fantastic to play. You don't usually have to mulligan super aggressively to find a ton of mana, because the win conditions for that deck are actually super mana efficient when you like look at them on the surface. They just kind of tend to require that you have some board presence to win, but Najeela brings all of that, and that's not to say the deck doesn't have like counterplay against it, or some pod dynamics that might be more challenging to play against, but there's never really been a situation where I felt like completely out of the game whatsoever playing that deck. And I pretty much, while playing that deck, always feel like I've got some kind of option to convert into like a fast win, or to interact with my opponents, or essentially just to generate some kind of advantage, adapt to any type of different pod. So it's really kind of what you would expect out of a 5-color commander with 1-card win conditions. It's just got that perfect, in my opinion, combination of like linear play, in the sense that you've always got the very clear line of Najeela into Derevi, with sort of like these like wide variety of choices you can make throughout a game, to adapt to different pods and to like pursue sort of different plans that the deck supports, like Adnaz, or like Thassa's Oracle lines, in the event that that main plan doesn't seem tenable. So where you trade some card advantage in the command zone against a deck like Thrasios Tymna, you just gain so much in terms of focus, as far as I'm concerned, and that is always sort of a strength of like a top-down deck versus a bottom-up deck, is this like ability to have your deck be focused around your game plan kind of like fully, as opposed to kind of just being a pile of cards. A lot of Thrasios Tymna decks, for better or for worse, ended up being kind of like good stuff piles. And the issue with those types of decks is, the whole plan is in the deck, and sometimes that leads you to not necessarily having like the best possible draws. Whereas with Najeela, you always have a plan in the command zone, and it's a plan, to win, as opposed to just grind value, which I think is, exceptionally powerful.
So what I'm hearing you say is that Najeela is just a vehicle for you to continue standing on Derevi in a deck that can actually win.
Correct. I don't deny that whatsoever. I think that was the thing that drew me to Najeela in the first place, was Derevi being a win condition in the deck.
I seriously, I stand by here, and I'll say this as loudly as possible. The best version of Sushi Hulk was the Najeela Sushi Hulk, personally. It just got you from every angle.
So good.
What'd you say?
I don't know if I agree with that.
I played that deck. It was so good. It could really win from every single angle. I don't know if it was the best Sushi Hulk deck, but I always felt like there was 700 ways I could win the game.
Right. That's Phoenix played that deck a lot, and it was a nightmare to play against. And I just I thought it was harder to game plan against Najeela Sushi Hulk than it was against just TNT Sushi Hulk, because TNT Sushi Hulk is kind of a one-trick pony. You know what they're doing. Now, it's hard to time against it. There was a lot of stuff that went into that. But with Najeela Sushi Hulk, they could be doing their Najeela stuff, and you have to deal with that. And then they're like, okay, well, now that you've dealt with that, I guess I'm just gonna Sushi Hulk on top of you and win. And it just, I thought that was the best version of it. And so now, even without it, I still think if Sushi Hulk had been banned in 2019, I would hold Najeela Tempo as the best deck of 2020. But Najeela is my pick. So here to wrap things up, we're gonna do a little segment here where we're going to talk about our predictions for what we expect to see in 2021. And, you know, I'll kind of kick things off here for us is what we kind of expect to see in 2021, in my opinion, is I think there will be a proliferation of prison and stack strategies that are going to continue to perform well, and they're going to see more play as a way of countering turbo decks. This is something we're already seeing right now is a lot of those strategies are starting to become more popular because they're very effective against turbo Nas decks. Not to, you know, name drop again, but a deck that is very good against turbo Nas is Lavinia, because a turn 1 Lavinia kind of ends the game for, like, they have to be able to remove the Lavinia in order to win. They cannot win through that. And so it's just, there's a lot of work being done to kind of make Lavinia's win cons a little bit better. But there also are a lot of other, you know, we've seen, you know, like King K Rule, we've seen Fairer Magic, we've seen those decks pop up and be effective. And that's just kind of what I expect to see out of 2021. Pongo, what do you anticipate to see here in 2021?
So I hope everyone's looking at the same spreadsheet here, and just what I wrote in all capital letters: powerful white cards.
Here he come.
You know, certainly something of a meme these days because of you know, high expectations for white cards coming out of Commander Legends that were not really met, at least as far as competitive EDH is concerned. I do think that this is something that Wizards is going to continue to try to actually address. I think that they have heard players' feedback, and we're sort of only at the beginning of, you know, where we're actually going to see sort of the fruits of their endeavors to make more powerful white cards for Commander. You know, I think that we saw that with Red last year, clearly. And I think that 2021 will be White's time to shine at long last. And I do think that some number of these cards are going to slot into, you know, like you were saying, these stack strategies. And we're at a point now where, you know, it does feel like we can kind of sort out our interaction packages a little bit better for, you know, our interactive Staxy type decks. And I agree that, you know, with a clear metagame to attack, we'll probably, or I hope we'll see a resurgence of, you know, decks that look to attack those types of decks in turn. So I think powerful white cards will further play into what you're saying, and empower prison and stack strategies even more. Yeah.
One thing to note there too is that I think a lot of people don't understand the true length of lag between development at Wizards of the Coast and the release of product. Right. They've been talking about, you know, they're talking about, you know, increasing the power level of white and, you know, making some real intentional choices there to bring some power into that region of the color pie. The cards we're seeing come out now were designed multiple years ago, so there's a huge lag between you know, those two events, you know, development to actually
typically like 2 years,
right?
Yeah, up to 2 years.
So they've been talking about it. It feels like they've been talking about, you know, this initiative for a while. We're just now starting to see some of that stuff hit. And to what you said, I think in 21 and probably even in 22, we're going to start seeing a lot of those intentional efforts actually hit the street. So it'll be an exciting time, I think. Yeah,
for sure. But what are your then predictions for 2020?
So
or 2021, excuse me.
Yeah, for 2021, with the exit of Sushi Hulk, so Rule of Law was not particularly great against Flash Hulk. It actually made Flash Hulk decks better. But
along with Trinisphere,
right,
and a few other pieces,
right. But with the exit of Flash Hulk, people, I think, there were multiple people in the community that kind of had the realization that rule of law, it was kind of the premier, most effective way of dealing with kind of the boogeyman in the format. Rule of law makes it such that, you really can't execute a Thassa's Oracle plus Consult at all, unless you're willing to string it across turn boundaries, which is high risk. And also, it completely invalidates ad nauseum strategies and makes Underworld Breach strategies untenable as well. So it's kind of this, it's become the accepted stacks strategy for dealing with the metagame. And we're seeing more, with Archon of Emeria, kind of like more instances of it being printed, and people have kind of found out how to, further accentuate the disparity by coupling those things with Possibility Storm or Knowledge Pool and that kind of thing. And we're just starting to see success in the tournament scene with people like Michael Levine, doing Heliod, with Fairer Magic, to some extent there as well. It hasn't been embraced a lot, but people are starting to see those results and, spark interest there as well. And I think what's going to happen is, as we see the kind of the dominance of Turbo Naz decks and, highly active decks of that ilk deepen in 2021, I think that you're going to see a kind of a surge of rule of law tribal decks kind of rise in contention with that to attack the metagame from that angle. And we're starting to see a little bit of it through 2020. I think that with the potentially with the new white cards that we should be seeing in 2021, and just with kind of the growing acceptance of people willing to take that up as a strategy, we are going to see that kind of gain more of a foothold and have kind of a bigger presence and market share in the metagame in 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to cap this off with Dylan. Dylan, what are your predictions for 2021?
Oh, geez. My predictions are actually kind of opposite. So I actually think I think Ad Nauseam is going to go above and beyond the stacks decks. I think someone's going to figure out the definitive best Turbo Naz list. I think people... I don't know. I shouldn't make presumptions about people, but in my opinion, I have found that cEDH, it is often most advantageous to be offensive rather than defensive. It's just your win rate is higher if you're playing the best deck in the format rather than trying to beat the best deck in the format. I found that to be true in other formats when I played Hogak or when I played Eldrazi's. It's just better to play that deck than it is to play the deck that beats that deck, I think. And I think that's even more so true in multiplayer. It's just... because of the way turn order works, because of the way that there's 4 different players, I think it's just better to be aggressive. So I think more people... I think that my prediction is that Turbo Ad Nauseam is going to get the most eyes on it this year over any other deck, which is going to push it more than any other deck just because more people are going to be looking at it. So that's my opinion for 2021. More Turbo Naz.
That sounds
more
like
Naz.
Sounds like a gauntlet being thrown down and a setting for another gameplay video.
More Naz.
Rule of law versus Ad Naz.
Let's do the triple stacks, one Turbo Ad Naz deck.
Yes.
And we'll get Morgan to play the Turbo Ad Naz deck.
The amount of comments that I get for people asking for best stacks deck, that is an absolute nightmare that I get asked for quite a bit, and I never want to actually do. Like
Bring us
4
on.
best
What is
stacks
it?
against 4 stack stacks, like the best stack stacks, 4 stack stacks against each other.
Been
do
there,
it.
done that.
We
Don't
tried that.
do it. Yeah,
Don't do
That's
it.
just like
you.
Saturday
we
night.
have
Football.
it was a 3.5 hour game that's sitting on my hard drive, and I refused to look at it.
We'll make it available to the Patreon.
That's like
I
an
wanna burn it
unedited
with fire.
Patreon patrons at some point.
And I won that game, and I want to burn it with fire. It was awful. It was the worst game I've ever played in my entire life.
Soul crushing.
But thank you all for joining us today on, but anyway, you did that voice and made me want to do it.
You're welcome.
But yeah, so Dylan, thank you so much for joining us this week. I know we've done some collaborations with you this past week, and it's honestly been a real pleasure. We've been a fan of your channel for a while, and so it's great to get to do some crossover work with you and get to know you and Cam.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to help and happy to be on, and thank you for having me. This was a blast. Yeah,
absolutely. And thank you, the listeners, and well, I guess viewers also were on YouTube.
If you're still
for
with
checking us out and listening to us for the past 2.5 hours discuss what the best cards were we thought of this year. If you like what we're doing and you want to help support the show, make sure to like and subscribe. I need to say that more throughout our videos.
Right.
But make sure to like and subscribe. And also, if you want to check us out on Patreon, there is a link down below. We have a couple different tiers, and that greatly helps us out. We really appreciate our patrons. So go check that out. But with that, thank you all for joining us. And with that, we are going to see you next week. We've got a really awesome episode lined up for you guys next week where me, Cobble, Spleen, and I believe Phoenix is who's joining us on that, are going to be coming at you with our first ever Brewer's Choice episode. So that'll be really fun and exciting. I'm so excited to bring it to you guys. So you'll have to keep your eyes peeled for that one. So until then, thanks for listening to The Mind Sculptors, and we'll see you next week.